Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking something that honestly causes so many of us a deep, quiet sense of shame, procrastination, and we're going to transform it into a totally actionable, completely scientific roadmap. We are stepping away from the guilt trips today, and we're moving straight into how your brain and behavioral physics actually operate.
Look, if you keep getting stuck on tasks you genuinely care about, I really want you to know upfront, you are not alone. So many of us live with this internal monologue where we feel like we're just living the exact same day over and over again. You know the feeling, right? You sit down at your desk, you've got genuinely good intentions. You're going to pay 2 bills, answer just 1 email, and fill out a totally simple form. But then an hour goes by and you're still doom scrolling on your phone. Your chest feels tight, the bills are still sitting there unpaid, and you just feel entirely frozen. On paper, you know you're capable, but inside, it feels like your brain just keeps slamming into this invisible wall. So let's get into section 1, the myth of laziness. We literally have to debunk this right out of the gate.
Being stuck is not a character flaw. It absolutely does not mean you have a lack of willpower. What you're probably experiencing is what clinicians call executive dysfunction. Think of your executive functions like your brain's internal management system. It's this complex network that helps you plan things out, shift your attention, and regulate your emotions. Well, executive dysfunction is basically a breakdown in that management system. It explains exactly why your brain hits that invisible wall, turning all your good intentions into unfinished projects and late fees. And this is especially true when your brain is already overloaded by stress, burnout, anxiety, or neurodivergence like ADHD or autism.
When you really break it down, our secret, everyday struggles actually map to very specific cognitive failures, like paying a bill late. That isn't about you being an irresponsible person. It's secretly overloading your working memory and your time management skills. A room that constantly stays cluttered isn't just you being messy, it's an actual breakdown in your brain's organization and self-monitoring. You know when you roughly know where things go, but the act of actually putting them away feels literally impossible? Yeah, that's because multi-step tasks are completely maxing out your brain's bandwidth.
I really want you to internalize this profound truth. You are not broken. You are just in a pattern. Our brains are fundamentally wired to be efficient, so they default to familiar routines, carving these deep neural pathways. The more you repeat a pattern, even a terribly paralyzing one like pulling out your phone when you feel overwhelmed, the deeper that loop gets. But here's the good news. Simply being aware of this loop is the very first step to stepping out of it.
Which brings us to section 2, the physics of productivity. To break these loops, we're going to gamify this struggle using classical mechanics.
Believe it or not, productivity is surprisingly mechanical. I mean, even Sir Isaac Newton probably procrastinated on his chores, right? But think about his laws of motion applied to your to-do list. First, objects at rest tend to stay at rest, meaning mathematically, getting started is the absolute hardest part of any task. Second, force equals mass times acceleration. It isn't just about how hard you work, it's about the direction you apply that energy. And third, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Your productivity is essentially a tug of war. You've got productive forces like motivation battling unproductive forces like stress or lack of sleep. And honestly, eliminating the opposing friction is almost always way more effective than just trying to summon pure willpower to push through it. So here is the ultimate hack for Newton's first law, the 2-minute rule. To overcome the friction of being at rest, you have to shrink the activation energy required to move. Don't tell yourself you have to go for a 5-mile run. That's too huge. Just tell yourself to put on your running shoes and fill up your water bottle. Don't sit down or write a massive 10-page report. Just open the blank document and type out the title. If you find a way to start your task in less than 2 minutes, you're going to find that an object in motion really does tend to stay in motion.
And that leads us right into section 3, the power of starting tiny. We're going to bring together 2 massive behavioral frameworks to solve this.
But before we do, chew on this number for a second. 40. Researchers have found that 40% of our daily behaviors are just automatic habits. Nearly half of what you do today isn't even a conscious choice. This perfectly proves why we have to redesign our routines instead of constantly trying to drain our extremely limited daily supply of willpower.
The difference between the two frameworks we're looking at basically comes down to starting versus sustaining. On one hand, we've got James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is a systems and identity-first approach. It is phenomenal for sustaining long-term progress. On the other hand, we have BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, which is entirely emotion-first. Tiny Habits is hands down the best method for bypassing that initial awful friction of getting off the couch when you feel totally paralyzed. Basically, if you can't even get a behavior off the ground, you need Fogg. But if your habits always seem to fade out after 3 weeks, you need Clear.
Let's look at Fogg's foolproof sequence for getting started. He calls it the ABC method. First, you need an anchor. This is an existing routine you already do without thinking, like pouring your morning coffee. Second, the behavior. Now this must take under 30 seconds. I'm talking 2 push-ups or putting exactly 1 plate into the dishwasher. And finally, celebration. Immediately after you do the behavior, you have to generate a positive emotion. Give a quiet little yes or a quick fist pump. I know it sounds a little silly, but it's neuroscience. That immediate hit of positive emotion wires your brain with a dopamine reward loop. It literally codes the new behavior as something your brain wants to repeat.
Okay, moving to section 4, building systems that last. Once you've used those tiny 30-second habits to actually get off the starting line, we have to build the architecture to keep you going.
This is exactly where James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change step in. To scale up your tiny habits into permanent identity shifts, you systematically redesign your environment. Make the cue obvious. Leave your gym shoes right by the front door. Make the craving attractive. Make the response easy by removing as much friction as humanly possible. And make the reward satisfying. You're shifting your mindset from saying, well, I'm trying to read more, to simply declaring, I am a reader. You are designing a system where doing the right thing literally becomes the path of least resistance.
And we ground this whole system in science with the number 66. Research shows it takes a median of 66 days to form a true automatic habit. Sure, sometimes it clicks in 18 days, sometimes it takes 200, but 66 is the median. The huge takeaway here is that consistency matters so much more than intensity. Doing a tiny 2-minute version of your habit for 66 days straight is going to change your brain's wiring far more effectively than doing some massive, exhausting 3-hour bursts just once a week.
Finally, we reach section 5, progress through self-compassion. We have to talk about the psychological safety net that keeps all of this together.
How do you actually keep your momentum up for 66 days without burning out or slipping right back into executive dysfunction? You use the self-compassion reset. First, test your inner voice. When you inevitably slip up, are you calling yourself lazy? Stop and ask yourself, would I say this to my best friend? If the answer is no, you have to cut that negative self-talk out, because harsh self-criticism actively spikes your stress and just fuels more executive dysfunction. Second, take a genuinely guilt-free micro break. Step away. And third, reconnect with your why. What exactly would your future self thank you for doing today?
There's amazing research from the Harvard Business Review that captures what they call the progress principle. They found that of all the things that can boost our inner work life, our motivation, and our engagement, the single most important factor is just making progress in meaningful work. Tracking small, meaningful wins is the ultimate catalyst. You do not need a massive victory to feel motivated. A tiny, 30-second win literally changes the chemistry of your brain and sets you up to succeed tomorrow.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real challenge. Think about the tasks that have been paralyzing you lately. I want you to apply the physics of productivity right this second. What is one tiny 30-second action? An action so ridiculously small you literally cannot fail at it that your future self will thank you for. Find it, do it, and celebrate it. Because at the end of the day, the trajectory of your life isn't defined by massive, exhausting leaps. It's defined by the physics of simply choosing to start. Go find your 30 seconds.
Welcome back to The Explainer, designed specifically for you, the focused learner. Today, we're demystifying exactly how we unlock our true potential. And listen, we aren't dealing with vague, fluffy motivations today. No, we are looking at the concrete, provable psychology behind what actually drives human success. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So consider this for a second. Walt Disney was actually fired from a Missouri newspaper at age 22 because, get this, he supposedly lacked creativity. Crazy, right? And Oprah Winfrey, she was famously told early in her career that she was too emotional and just unfit for television. Both of them faced massive, crushing rejections. So what separates those who overcome these incredibly daunting obstacles from those who simply throw in the towel and accept defeat? Like, what is the secret engine here? Well, as pioneering psychologist Dr. Albert Bandura noted, if you think you can, you probably can. But here is the absolutely critical distinction we need to make. This isn't some toxic positivity or a fluffy fake-it-till-you-make-it buzzword. Believing in yourself is a provable, actionable, and highly researched psychological skill. It's literally a muscle you can build, strengthen, and deploy.
Here is our cognitive roadmap for today. 1. The science of self-belief. 2. Esteem versus confidence versus efficacy. 3. Why positive mindsets matter. 4. Rewiring thoughts with CBT. And 5. Building your self-efficacy toolkit. Let's move to the next part and see how this all builds from theory into practical tools. Section 1. The science of self-belief.
So the study of the mind has some serious historical weight. Back in the early 1900s, when psychology was totally obsessed with behaviorism, Mary Whiton Colkins introduced this revolutionary idea of the self as an active, conscious force. And despite being denied a PhD at Harvard solely because she was a woman, she used her own active self-belief to become the first female president of the American Psychological Association. Incredible, right? This laid the groundwork for Albert Bandura in 1977, who actually proved the theory of self-efficacy, basically our belief in our capacity to perform specific tasks. And then finally, in 2006, Carol Dweck brought us the growth mindset, proving that viewing our abilities as something we can develop rather than just fixed traits, well, it changes absolutely everything.
Section 2. Esteem versus confidence versus efficacy. Let's untangle these clinical terms real quick. First up is self-esteem. This is your broad, global sense of self-worth. It's your ability to treat yourself with kindness and recognize your inherent value. Now, it's an absolutely essential foundation for your emotional well-being. However, as Bandura's research points out, self-love without the active motivation of belief can actually risk becoming passive complacency. You might feel perfectly content with the status quo, but you won't necessarily push yourself to grow or take on new things.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clinical data breaks down these thought patterns. A healthy self-esteem operates from that classic glass-half-full perspective. You value your own opinions and view your failures as just learning experiences. Conversely, low self-esteem kind of keeps you anchored in the past. You're heavily focused on perceived flaws, and you hesitate to take on new challenges. It fundamentally limits what you actually do.
Next is self-confidence. This is often treated like a broad personality trait, right? Like you might say, oh, I'm a confident person. But here is the trap. Research shows that global self-confidence often totally mispredicts outcomes when a person is dealing with specific, brand new challenges. It's simply too broad to be an accurate predictor of success in a highly targeted area.
And that brings us to the real engine of the whole shebang, self-efficacy. This is highly, highly targeted. It's your situation-specific belief that you can produce a designated level of performance. It's having a nuanced understanding of your own skills in a given context. Basically, self-efficacy is what actually predicts outcomes, drives your actions, and keeps you from throwing in the towel when things get tough.
Section 3. Why positive mindsets matter. Let's look at the real-world benefits here.
The numbers really speak for themselves. According to the Journal of Organizational Behavior, optimistic employees are 31% more productive. To put that into perspective, that is a massive jump in output. Why? Well, because they aren't draining their valuable mental energy dwelling on negativity, hesitating, or obsessing over a fear of failure. When you genuinely believe in success, you immediately allocate your cognitive resources toward taking action, rather than just bracing for impact. And this brilliantly illustrates how that positive mindset is actually grounded in physical reality. Neuroscientific research by Moser and his colleagues demonstrated that individuals with a growth mindset literally exhibit greater neuroplasticity. So when they make a mistake, their brains actually show greater activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the area associated with adapting and adjusting. Basically, a growth mindset physically rewires your brain to adapt after you mess up, building these deep, resilient cognitive roots.
Section 4. Rewiring thoughts with CBT.
So, what if you are currently stuck in a cycle of self-doubt? Well, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, provides a very clear framework to break out of it. It teaches us that situations themselves don't actually cause our negative emotions. Instead, it's our automatic thoughts about a situation that trigger our emotions, which then drive our behaviors and even our physiological fight or flight reactions, like that pounding heart or dry mouth you get when you're nervous. If you want to change your behavior and your physical anxiety, you have to intercept the thought first.
Often, these automatic thoughts are just systematic errors called cognitive distortions. We're talking about mental traps like all or nothing thinking, making sweeping overgeneralizations, assuming you can read minds, catastrophizing the future, or just labeling yourself a failure based on a single mistake. Let me break the fourth wall for a second and ask you directly. Take a look at these. Which of these automatic mental traps regularly sabotages your own self-efficacy? Think about it.
To escape these traps, we use cognitive restructuring. First, you actively identify the thought. Second, and honestly, this is absolutely vital, you stop and ask yourself, is this a thought or is it a fact? That question is the absolute quickest way to break down distorted emotional reasoning. If it's just a thought, well, it's just an opinion. Third, you reframe it based purely on actual evidence. You replace that catastrophic prediction with a realistic, manageable perspective.
Section 5. Building your self-efficacy toolkit. Let's get practical. So the crucial point here is how we actually build this. Dr. Bandura outlines 4 sequential methods to build authentic self-efficacy. First, mastery experiences. Tackle complex projects step by step, because success breeds competence. Second, vicarious experiences. Observe positive role models. Hey, if they can do it, you can too, right? Third, social persuasion. Surround yourself with encouraging, supportive feedback. And fourth, manage your emotional states. Minimize that chronic anxiety so you can stay effective. It's exactly like the sustained effort of the little engine that could. That "I think I can" mindset translates directly into methodical, persistent action. And here is your rapid-fire daily toolkit. Break down your massive goals into tiny, bite-sized tasks. Engage in daily self-reflection. When a challenge pops up, embrace it as a learning opportunity, not a threat. Practice mindfulness to anchor yourself in the present moment, and always, always celebrate your small wins. As researchers at Charles Darwin University put it, you must make up your mind to become an advanced student in the school of life. These are active skills that require conscious, daily practice. So, we've covered the history, the clinical definitions, the neuroscience, and the daily tactical steps. You now have the structured tools to actively rewire your mind, intercept those pesky negative thoughts, and build truly authentic self-efficacy. The architecture is literally right there for you. The only question left is, what will you conquer first?
All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're going to decode the actual biology of self-belief today and figure out exactly why waiting for that perfect moment is totally keeping you stuck. Look, if you've ever felt like you just don't have the motivation to go after your goals, you're in the right place. We're diving deep into the hard science of how our brains process doubt, success, and most importantly, action.
Honestly, we've all been there, right? You're just staring at a blank screen or looking down at your running shoes, completely paralyzed by self-doubt. You just kind of assume you need to feel ready or, inspired before you can tackle those big goals. Society has totally sold us this idea that this elusive muse of motivation just has to strike before we can do great work. But here's the thing. Science shows us that waiting for that mood, it's actually a massive biological trap. There was this really profound realization from a viral post in the Lemon 8 community, and it absolutely nails our core theme for today. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. The author realized that by constantly chasing inspiration and comfort, they were literally just avoiding growth. They were chasing a feeling instead of an actual result. And as you'll see, there's some deep neuroscience backing up why this mindset shift is an absolute game changer. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to hit 5 key areas: the trap of self-doubt, how doubt warps perception, the neuroscience of confidence, the myth of motivation, and finally, rewiring your brain for success. Okay, let's kick things off with section 1, the trap of self-doubt, and really defining the struggle.
Now, to truly solve the whole problem of feeling stuck, we actually need to get our terminology straight. We throw words around like confidence and self-esteem all the time, but just look at how incredibly specific these scientific distinctions are. Self-confidence isn't just some personality trait you're born with, right? It's an expectation that is built entirely on your actual past experiences. Then you have self-efficacy, which is your belief in your capacity to perform a very specific task, like public speaking or coding. And self-esteem, that's your overall baseline valuation of yourself as a person. The real beauty here is that confidence fluctuates based on your actions, which means you literally have the power to build it yourself. And the absolute crucial point to remember is that true confidence never, ever requires putting other people down. It's grounded in humility, it invites people in. Truly confident people, they admit their weaknesses without feeling any shame. Arrogance, on the flip side, is totally driven by deep insecurity and this constant need for superiority. It's just a mask. When you're genuinely building your confidence, you don't look at someone else's win as your loss. Moving on to Section 2, how doubt warps perception, and this whole obsession with competence. So self-doubt doesn't just make you feel bad internally, it literally distorts how you see the people around you. Researchers from Ohio State University and a few other places found something so fascinating. If you have high self-doubt, it's not actually that you expect to fail, it's more like you are just chronically uncertain about your own abilities. And that constant, exhausting search for the truth about your own worth, it makes you hyper-fixated on intellectual competence. You basically become obsessed with measuring intelligence both in yourself and in literally everyone else. Take a look at the data from this impression formation study. Participants had to rate fictional targets based on a few traits. And the data clearly shows that people with high self-doubt harshly judge unintelligent targets, but they rate highly intelligent targets incredibly positively. For them, intellectual competence is basically the ultimate standard of human value. This contrast proves the point beautifully. In classic psychology, warmth is usually the #1 trait we use to judge people. If someone's warm, we like them. People with low self-doubt follow that exact pattern. They value warmth way more than intelligence. But for self-doubters, evaluating intelligence is their central filter for how they perceive the whole world. They actually weigh intelligence and warmth equally. Their own internal uncertainty makes them project that exact same measuring stick onto every single person they meet. Let's get into the biology. Section 3, the neuroscience of confidence and mapping the brain. How does all this actually play out physically inside our heads? Well, confidence isn't just sitting in one isolated spot in your brain. It's this dynamic, ongoing feedback loop powered by multiple regions. You've got the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which maintains your sense of identity. Then there's the striatum, which relies heavily on dopamine to actually push you toward taking action. And, this is wild, in the medial temporal lobe, researchers found that neurons literally fire action potentials faster when you report feeling high confidence. Your brain is essentially acting as a physical engine, computing confidence in real time as you make decisions. Which brings us to this incredible biological phenomenon called the winner effect. When you pull off a win, even a tiny, seemingly insignificant one, your brain releases a surge of dopamine and testosterone. This physically changes your brain chemistry. It creates more receptors for those hormones. It's like a biological flywheel. Every single small victory rewires your nervous system, making you statistically more likely to win again in the future. So let's flip the script. Section 4, the myth of motivation and reversing the formula. Armed with this science, we can finally dismantle the biggest societal myth that's keeping us all paralyzed. If confidence is built on a biological flywheel of past successes, then our whole approach to getting motivated is completely backwards. We've been sold this massive lie that inspiration just has to strike first. We think, oh, I'll go to the gym when I feel energized, or I'll start writing when I'm feeling creative. But waiting for those perfect conditions, it's simply a defensive mechanism. Like that Lemonade post highlighted, it's just fear dressed up as strategy. By avoiding the action, you're literally depriving your brain of the exact dopamine it needs to create the feeling of motivation in the first place. This mantra forces a total mindset shift. Move first, feel later. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. You have to leverage discipline to kickstart that dopamine loop before the motivation even shows up. Remember the striatum from our brain map earlier? It needs you to act first. When you drag yourself to the gym and suddenly feel amazing halfway through the workout, that isn't magic. That is your biology reacting to your discipline. All right, final section. Section 5, rewiring your brain for success, and some actionable strategies you can use. So how do we actually hijack our biology in real life to beat procrastination? These 3 tactical steps are brilliant because they're specifically designed to break that initial inertia and guarantee those quick, small wins. First, the 5-minute rule. Just commit to a dreaded task for 5 minutes. That's it. It lowers the barrier to entry so much that your brain doesn't hit the panic button. Second, break it down. Find the smallest possible first step to kill the overwhelm. And third, schedule the action, not the motivation. Treat it like an admissible appointment. These tiny completions trigger your brain's reward system, releasing that crucial dopamine we've been talking about. Here's another fascinating strategy for dealing with stress. Did you know that anxiety and excitement actually share the exact same high physical arousal state in your body? Your heart races, your palms sweat, it's the whole shebang. Because of this, trying to force yourself to calm down almost always fails.
Instead, simply saying "I am excited" out loud uses what psychologists call arousal congruency to easily shift your emotional state. It is a literal biological loophole that reframes a negative thought loop into a positive one. How cool is that?
You can also literally trick your brain into a confident state using your body. Adopting expansive postures like power posing for just a couple of minutes dramatically increases your subjective feelings of power and totally changes your body awareness. Even wilder, mental rehearsal. Visualizing your success actually activates the exact same neural pathways in your brain as performing the action for real. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference. It just proves that the old saying, "fake it till you make it," isn't just a catchy phrase. It's completely backed by hard neuroscience. So we've seen how self-doubt traps us, how our brains process confidence, and exactly why discipline beats motivation every single time. Knowing that action is the literal biological ignition switch for motivation, my final challenge to you is this. Pick one task you've been putting off. Apply the 5-minute rule right now. Do not wait for the mood to strike. Go create your own momentum, and let your brain's biology take care of the rest.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tearing down the anatomy of a breakthrough. Have you ever set this massive, life-altering goal only to watch your motivation just totally fizzle out a few weeks later? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the hard science of exactly why we fail at those huge goals. But more importantly, we're building a structured, brain-based toolkit for real, lasting change. Let's get right into it. Let's kick things off with a pretty jarring number, 43%. According to a daily experience study by researcher Wendy Wood, 43% of our everyday behaviors are performed entirely out of habit. Just think about that for a second. Nearly half of your entire life is running on absolute autopilot, without you even making a conscious choice.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this idea from James Clear perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to cover. He says, we do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. You know, we've always been taught that success requires these massive, wildly ambitious goals. But honestly, big goals just overwhelm our brains. They create this huge, intimidating gap between where we are right now and where we want to be. Reliable systems, though, that's what actually builds the real, tangible progress we're looking for.
Which brings us to Act 1, the illusion of immediate success. We live in a world that completely romanticizes the overnight success story. But behavioral science tells a very different tale. If you're feeling stuck, you're probably trapped in what's known as the plateau of latent potential. This is that invisible, frustrating delay where the gap between putting in the hard work and actually seeing the results feels absolutely intolerable. But listen, hitting this wall isn't a failure. It's actually a necessary gathering of potential. It's kind of like a stonecutter striking a rock. They might hit it 37 times with zero visible effect, but on that 38th blow, it splits perfectly in two. The work from those first 37 strikes wasn't wasted at all. It was just being stored up for the big breakthrough.
All right, welcome to Act 2, the biology of behavior. To really understand why breaking old habits is so incredibly hard, we have to literally look at our hardwiring.
It all boils down to this fascinating biological process called synaptic pruning. Basically, your brain actively prunes away the neural connections you don't use and drastically strengthens the ones you use all the time. Every single time you repeat a behavior, the neural pathways supporting it get physically stronger and way faster. Your brain is quite literally rewiring itself based on whatever it is you do every single day.
To put that into perspective, consider this wild biological reality. Researchers at Oxford University found that a newborn baby actually has 41% more neurons than the average adult. Crazy, right? A newborn's brain is just a blank canvas. Endless possibilities, but super weak connections. By the time you reach adulthood, your brain has pruned away 41% of those possibilities, just to become highly efficient. Your adult brain has hardwired your daily routines, so they run lightning fast and are deeply, deeply ingrained.
And here is where all that automaticity actually lives. This little structure deep inside the brain is called the basal ganglia. Its entire job is just to save you mental energy. You can think of it as your brain's ultimate battery saver mode. Once the basal ganglia takes over, shifting your repeated actions from conscious, deliberate effort into automatic routines, you don't even have to think about what you're doing anymore. It just happens. Moving right along to Act 3, Systems over Goals. Now that we understand the biological why, let's completely shift your mindset to the strategic what.
Here is a fundamental shift in how we need to think. Goals are all about the results and winning the game.
Systems, on the other hand, are about the processes and continuing to play the game. Big goals practically guarantee burnout, because the finish line is just so far away. Systems, though, focus on the daily process, and here's the best part. By completing your small daily system, you give your brain the immediate dopamine hits it absolutely craves, which naturally reinforces that behavior over time.
Now, an amazingly powerful part of any good system is what we call a keystone habit. These are small, foundational changes that trigger a total domino effect of positive transformation across your entire life. So, for example, if you focus purely on just one single keystone habit, maybe it's morning meditation or regular exercise, it naturally spills over. Suddenly, you might find you're eating better, your emotional balance improves, your productivity gets sharper, all cascading from that one single foundational change.
But let's be real, sheer willpower is almost never enough to build these systems. To truly make a change stick, we can look at the ABC model from cognitive behavioral therapy. Step 1 is the activating event, like a specific cue. Step 2 is your belief, the thoughts and feelings you attach to that event. And step 3 is the consequence, your actual behavioral response. If you want to drive a new consequence, you can't just force it. You absolutely must deliberately change the underlying belief. If you believe exercise is absolute torture, well, the consequence is going to be procrastination, right? Change the belief and you completely change the behavior.
And that brings us to the climax of our explainer, Act 4, the Habit Building Toolkit. Let's roll up our sleeves and look at some highly actionable steps you can start using literally today.
So the crucial point here is understanding the neurological feedback loop. Every single habit follows this exact 4-step process to create that automaticity in the brain we talked about. First, there's a cue that triggers you. Second, a craving, which acts as the motivational force. Third, the response, which is the actual habit you perform. And fourth, the reward, which satisfies that craving and essentially tells your brain, hey, remember this exact loop for the future.
The beauty is, we can intentionally hack that exact feedback loop using James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. To build a solid good habit, you make the cue obvious, you make the craving attractive, you make the response incredibly easy, and you make the reward satisfying. And guess what? It works beautifully in reverse too. If you're trying to break a bad habit, you just invert those laws. Make the cue completely invisible, make the craving unattractive, make the response really difficult, and make the reward totally unsatisfying.
One of the absolute best ways to make a habit obvious and easy is a technique called habit stacking. The formula is beautifully simple. After my current habit, I will do my new habit. This method is rooted in BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits research, and it's just a brilliant way to piggyback new actions right onto those strong, pre-existing neural pathways we discussed earlier. So instead of relying on an arbitrary time on the clock, you anchor your new habit to something your brain already does automatically every single day.
In action, this needs to be highly specific. So, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate. After I take off my work shoes, I will immediately put on my gym clothes. After I sit down to dinner, I will say one thing I'm grateful for. The secret sauce here is extreme specificity. A goal like eat better is just way too vague. The cue has to be highly specific and immediately actionable, so your basal ganglia knows exactly when it's time to kick in. Finally, we enter Act 5, the compounding payoff. Let's look at the massive, long-term impact of actually sticking to your daily systems.
And this brilliantly illustrates how these small patterns build on top of one another over time to create something truly massive. It is exactly like financial compounding. One tiny 1% improvement doesn't look like much today. In fact, it's barely even noticeable. But when you stack those minor improvements day after day after day, the results become exponential and honestly massive.
Now, we all know getting started is usually the hardest part, but you can actually hack your psychology to get over that hump using the Zeigarnik effect. This is the psychological tension our brains naturally maintain around unfinished tasks. By simply starting a tiny, almost ridiculously small action, you leverage this effect. It creates this mental hook that actually pulls you to finish the task. It's proof that action actually creates motivation, not the other way around.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an undeniable mathematical truth. If you can get just 1% better each day for 1 year, you don't just end up a little bit better, you end up 37.8 times better by the time the year is done. Conversely, if you get 1% worse every day, you decline almost all the way down to 0. It is a staggering reality that perfectly shows exactly how powerful small actions are over time. Which leaves us with this provocative question.
What small vote will you cast for your future identity today? Because true behavior change isn't just about achieving a specific result, it's a complete identity shift. You really don't need a massive overhaul to change your life. You just need to cast one small vote, build the system, and let your brain's biology handle the rest. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. The polls are open, so what's your vote gonna be?
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You are staring down a massively mounting to-do list, and you just feel completely frozen. You literally cannot force yourself to take that very first step. Well, if you've ever been there, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're gonna empathize with that awful, overwhelming feeling of being stuck. And more importantly, we're gonna equip you with a science-backed toolkit to finally break out of it.
Here's our roadmap to get us unstuck today. We'll start by unmasking paralysis, then dig into the psychology of why we get stuck, figure out how to break tasks down into bite sizes, unleash some Pomodoro power, and finally, we'll wrap up by hacking our habits and rewards. Let's dive right in.
Starting with Section 1, Unmasking Procrastination and Paralysis. To really get a handle on this, we first have to realize that not all delays are created equal. You know, so often we beat ourselves up thinking we're just being lazy, but actually, that might just be an executive function crash. There's a huge difference between casual procrastination and actual paralysis. General procrastination is, well, just putting things off even when you know you shouldn't. But paralysis, which is heavily linked to ADHD and executive dysfunction, is when your brain essentially shuts down. You freeze up completely because of information overload, intense emotions, or just an inability to process multi-step instructions.
Honestly, just understanding that difference offers immediate emotional relief. But we can actually break this paralysis down even further into 3 distinct flavors. First, there's mental paralysis. This is your brain literally crashing from sensory or emotional overload. Second is choice paralysis. That's having way too many options and freezing up from the fear of making the wrong call. And third is task paralysis, where you hesitate to start something because it's either overwhelmingly complex or, on the flip side, incredibly understimulating.
Moving right along to Section 2, the psychology of getting stuck. Now that we've diagnosed the types of paralysis, let's look under the hood at the brain chemistry that's actually keeping us frozen in place.
Have you ever heard of the Zeigarnik effect? It is this fascinating psychological loophole. It was discovered by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik when she noticed that restaurant waiters could perfectly remember unpaid orders but totally forgot them the second the bill was settled. It proves that our brains absolutely hate unfinished business. So if you just start a task and intentionally leave it incomplete, the nagging discomfort of that cliffhanger will actually motivate you to return and finish the job.
But hey, what if you literally can't bring yourself to take that very first step? Well, welcome to the dopamine disconnect. Dopamine is what processes reward and motivation in your brain. If a boring task isn't naturally stimulating, your brain simply won't release the dopamine you need to spark action. So this isn't a willpower issue at all, it's a biological hurdle. Which means, to get moving, we have to actively game our own system to manufacture that motivation.
And that brings us perfectly to Section 3, breaking tasks into bite sizes. How exactly do we game our system to bypass that dopamine crash and cure the overwhelm?
We do it by shrinking our workload down until it's practically irresistible. Following a brilliant productivity method from Amazing Marvin, here is the linear progression of taking a massive, scary project and making it actually doable. First, define it as a project. Second, break it into weekly or monthly milestones. Third, list out single-step tasks using highly specific action verbs. And finally, turn those into time-boxed actions that take less than an hour to complete. But wait, before you can logically organize those steps, you have to clear out your mental RAM. You do this with a daily brain dump. Get every single swirling thought out of your head and onto a physical piece of paper, or a digital doc, whatever works for you. Once it's physically out of your brain, you can finally review it, eliminate the noise, prioritize the stuff that actually matters, and attach specific deadlines. All right, on to Section 4, time boxing and Pomodoro power. With our mental RAM totally clear and our tasks perfectly bite-sized, we need a foolproof execution strategy.
Let's be real, it is incredibly uncomfortable to stare down a massive project. That knot in your stomach is a very real thing, so it prompts a vital question. When you are absolutely dreading a task, exactly how long do you actually need to endure that discomfort before you can stop?
The magic number is just 25. 25 minutes. This is the heart of Francesco Cirilla's famous Pomodoro technique. By committing to just 25 minutes of focus, followed by a quick 5-minute break, you transform time from a terrifying source of anxiety into an exact, manageable measure of productivity. You're not committing to finishing the whole project, you are literally just committing to one little tomato timer.
Now, to make this Pomodoro technique actually work, there are 3 strict rules. Number 1, if a task takes more than 4 Pomodoros, it's too complex. Break it down further. Number 2, if a task takes less than 1, group it with other tiny tasks, like knocking out a batch of emails. And number 3, the most important rule. Once that timer is set, it must ring. No checking your phone, no grabbing a quick snack. You protect that 25-minute bubble at all costs.
Finally, Section 5. Hacking habits and rewards. Because let's face it, white-knuckling your way through tasks forever, that's just not sustainable. We have to weave these productivity sprints into our daily identities using the science of habits. This is where James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change from Atomic Habits absolutely shine. Look at how perfectly these contrast. To build a good habit, you make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. Like, say, leaving your workout clothes right by your bed. But to break a bad habit, you do the exact opposite. You introduce friction by making it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
A huge part of making things easy is the legendary 2-minute rule. Instead of committing to running 3 miles, your only goal is to just put your running shoes on and step outside. That's it. You have to standardize a habit before you can even think about optimizing it. Mastering the simple art of showing up gives your brain a super easy win, which completely circumvents that paralysis.
And hey, remember that dopamine disconnect we talked about earlier? This is how we fix it. According to researchers at Cornell, you should swap out delayed gratification for immediate micro-rewards. Stop waiting until the end of the month to reward yourself. Treat yourself instantly after completing a 25-minute Pomodoro, whether that's 15 minutes of downtime, playing a favorite song, or grabbing a snack. Frequent, immediate rewards will absolutely skyrocket your motivation.
Ultimately, as you start building momentum with these tools, keep this profound thought from James Clear in mind. True behavior change doesn't come from just hitting a metric. It comes from shifting your core identity to match the person you are actively becoming. You aren't just crossing a task off a list, you are becoming a focused, productive person.
So, I want to leave you with one final challenge. Look at the absolute most daunting project on your plate right now. What tiny 2-minute action will you take to break the paralysis today? Don't overthink it, just start. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today we're unpacking a really fascinating strategy to boost both your productivity and your mental health. We're going to look at exactly how we can use the psychological science of small wins to conquer those massive, incredibly intimidating goals in our lives. If you have ever felt completely crushed by the sheer weight of a giant project, trust me, this explainer is exactly what you need.
So why do huge goals make us feel so unmotivated? It's such a universal frustration, right? You're staring down the barrel of a massive project, maybe a huge life change or a major career milestone, and instead of feeling totally fired up, you just feel completely paralyzed. Why does that happen? Well, the good news is it's not a lack of willpower. It's actually a matter of basic human psychology.
Which brings us to Section 1, the negativity trap.
It really all boils down to negativity bias. Basically, this is our brain's evolutionary tendency to laser focus far more heavily on negative events, mistakes, or criticisms than on our positive successes. Now, early humans definitely needed this to survive predators, but today, this ancient survival mechanism literally just causes burnout. We also suffer from something called completion bias. This is where our brains fiercely crave the quick dopamine hit of crossing off tiny, easy tasks, but make us avoid the complex, truly meaningful work because the finish line just feels miles away. Because of this, we end up ignoring our daily progress entirely.
There's actually a famous story about Albert Einstein that hits the nail on the head here. Picture this. He was teaching a math lesson and wrote 9 perfectly correct equations on the chalkboard. But on the 10th equation, he made a single mistake. Instead of acknowledging the 9 completely right answers, his students immediately pointed out the one error and started laughing. That right there is negativity bias in action. We instinctively give way more weight to that one single flaw than we do to the overwhelming evidence of success.
All right, let's move on to Section 2, the progress principle.
Think about James Watson and Francis Crick, the guys who discovered the structure of DNA. Their journey was a total roller coaster. Their motivation wasn't just steady from start to finish, it was entirely dictated by their perception of forward momentum. First, Their initial attempt at a model failed miserably, which plunged them into these dark days of ebbing motivation and intense doubt. But the second their breakthrough model finally succeeded, their morale absolutely skyrocketed. I mean, they practically lived in the lab after that. Human motivation is just inextricably linked to the feeling of moving forward.
And this isn't just anecdotal. Harvard researchers Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer dug deep into this in their amazing work, The Power of Small Wins. They exhaustively analyzed nearly 12,000 diary entries from knowledge workers to uncover what they called the progress principle. What they proved undeniably is that making progress on meaningful work, not just the final completion of the massive project, but the daily progress itself, is the ultimate motivator.
And here's the kicker, 76%. When they looked at the data, 76% of the workers' absolute best mood days involved making some sort of progress. Even a ridiculously minor step forward triggers a natural dopamine release in the brain that keeps us engaged and makes us feel highly capable. Progress is literally chemical fuel for your motivation.
So, let's break down what actually separates our best days from our worst. The best days are fueled by catalysts, which are things that directly support the work, and nourishers, things like words of encouragement and mutual respect. On the flip side, the worst days are dominated by setbacks and toxins, which are those discouraging events or toxic interactions. Because of that negativity bias we talked about earlier, a single setback or toxic event can completely poison our inner work life if we aren't incredibly intentional about focusing on our small wins instead.
Moving right along to Section 3, the habit stacking secret.
Now, habit stacking is an absolutely brilliant behavior change technique. It's all about making it way easier to adopt a new habit by literally attaching it to a routine you already do on autopilot. Why does this matter so much? Well, instead of trying to force a new behavior into your busy day using sheer willpower, you just stack it onto something familiar, like brushing your teeth or making your morning coffee. Doing this drastically cuts down on decision fatigue and helps that new habit stick incredibly naturally.
So, how do we do it? There are 4 clear steps to making habit stacking work for you. Step 1, identify your target habit. You need to be super specific about what you want to change. Step 2, practice mindfulness. Engage in the new activity with deliberate intention so you really build a sense of control. Step 3, transition to routine. Through sheer repetition, you'll eventually hit a flow state where the action becomes totally automatic. And finally, step 4, zoom out to see the bigger picture. Take a 360-degree view of your environment to make sure it actively supports this new habit, like, say, setting your gym clothes out the night before.
Let's get into Section 4, 3 daily wins. What if, instead of staring at a massive, soul-crushing to-do list, you just focused your energy on 3 simple categories: physical, mental, and life. Physical means moving your body, fueling it well, or prioritizing recovery. Mental is all about practicing a skill, finding deep focus, or doing something hard. And life is just handling a small task or organizing your space. Aiming for just one tiny win in each of these 3 areas every single day creates a massive psychological identity shift over time. You stop being someone who is chronically overwhelmed and you become someone who consistently makes progress.
This kind of micro to macro reframing is a total game changer. Think about it. Reading just 10 pages a day feels completely insignificant in the moment. It is such a tiny input, but if you actually do that every single day, it compounds into reading roughly 15 books a year. That is an extraordinary long-term transformation, all built entirely on one tiny daily win.
And that brings us to Section 5, tracking your momentum.
Get this, 42%. Studies actually show that simply writing down and tracking your habits boosts your chances of keeping them up by up to 42%. When you actively track your progress, you're building a visual roadmap of your success that literally overrides your brain's natural negativity bias. You can't ignore the progress when it's staring right at you.
And luckily, we've got some amazing tools to help with this. Here are a few top visual tracking apps out there for 2025. Serenity is awesome for building personalized visual roadmaps and timeline mind maps. Strides is perfect if you love pure metric charts and line graphs. Habitica is super fun because it gamifies your progress like an RPG video game. And Todoist uses these really fantastic productivity heat maps. Honestly, whichever you choose, the goal is the same, to literally visualize your momentum through streaks and charts.
But here's the catch. As you track, you absolutely have to adopt this vital mindset. Start every single day from zero. Tech CEO Edith Harbaugh actually learned this the hard way while bicycling 3,300 miles across the country. She realized that if you only focus on how much farther you have to go, your daily effort feels incredibly insignificant. But if you start every day with a blank slate, setting smaller daily quotas instead of staring at the distant finish line, you completely prevent complacency. Take just 5 minutes a day to journal your small wins and reset.
Author James Clear really hits the nail on the head here. He says, if you want to summarize the habits of successful people into one phrase, it's this: successful people start before they feel ready. Giving yourself the permission to focus purely on progress rather than absolute perfection is the true key to success. You don't need to have the whole massive project completely figured out. You literally just need to take the very first step.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one big provocative question. What small win are you going to claim today? Don't look at the giant mountain ahead of you. Just look at the single step right in front of your feet. Claim that win, track your progress, and watch just how quickly those micro wins transform your entire life. Thank you so much for joining me today, and go get that win.
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're exploring this deeply fascinating connection between the extreme, super high-stakes pressure of classical singing and, well, the everyday stressors that you and I face in our normal lives. Now, I know it sounds like a massive stretch, right? But the research we're unpacking today actually reveals that understanding how an opera singer manages a punishing spotlight holds the exact key to how we can manage our own daily hassles, college exams, or crazy office deadlines.
All right, let's dive into part 1, the pressure of performance.
You know, classical singing is literally one of the most demanding forms of music making on the planet. I mean, singers aren't just reciting notes. They have to combine this refined, absolutely flawless vocal technique with deep emotional authenticity, all while communicating live with an audience. As this quote from the Asian Scholars Network highlights, these performers operate under intense public scrutiny and continuous evaluative pressure. It's a level of vulnerability most of us can hardly even imagine, just standing there, entirely exposed on stage. And all of that intense scrutiny, well, it breeds a very specific type of terror known as music performance anxiety, or MPA. We're not just talking about a few butterflies in the stomach here. MPA is this profound anxiety that actually impairs attention, compromises memory retrieval, and completely strips away the singer's ability to be expressive. The very stress of the situation literally paralyzes their abilities. It's a high-stakes example of how stress can just short-circuit our brains, setting up this universal problem we all face when the pressure is really on.
Moving on to Section 2, the Creative Resilience Model. So how do they combat this anxiety? Performers rely on something called psychological flexibility. It's basically the capacity to remain present and act in alignment with chosen values, even while experiencing incredibly difficult internal thoughts or feelings. Instead of fruitlessly trying to suppress their stage fright, which, honestly, usually just makes it a whole lot worse, performers learn to accept it. They acknowledge the racing heart, they feel the intrusive thoughts, and they continue their value-directed action anyway.
This psychological flexibility is part of a much larger framework called the Creative Resilience Model, and it's built on 3 reinforcing pillars. First up, there's mindset flexibility, which enables them to work with the anxiety rather than constantly fighting against it. Second is expressive agency, which empowers them to take bold, interpretive risks. And third is identity work, which gives them a long-term, coherent narrative of who they are as an artist. Together, the whole shebang empowers performers to not just bounce back from adversity, but to creatively grow from it.
And here is the truly fascinating part. They build these pillars using their actual work. Singers use contrasting repertoire as a literal laboratory for testing their resilience. For example, the profound differences between Beethoven's Adelaide and Schubert's Gretchen im Spinnrad present entirely different expressive challenges. By navigating these completely contrasting emotional landscapes on stage, singers are actively practicing emotional regulation. They use the music itself to build up their psychological endurance.
So, the crucial point is, how does this apply to us? What if your stage isn't a grand, beautiful concert hall, but just a really crowded open-plan office, a brutal college exam, or, dealing with a horribly delayed commute?
That brings us to Section 3, coping with everyday stress.
To figure out how this applies to our lives, we can look at a fascinating research paper from the University of Illinois. They outlined 5 really comprehensive studies looking at exactly how we cope, and what's great is the sheer variety of everyday stressors they tested. They didn't just look at major life traumas, they looked at students sweating over college exams, people dealing with mundane, highly annoying timed typing tasks, and the absolute daily grind of pandemic stress. And guess what?
They found that the exact same psychological tools used by those elite opera singers apply to us all when we're just trying to figure out how to navigate an annoying Tuesday.
Let's move into Section 4, Meaning as a Resource.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core concept of the University of Illinois research, Meaning in Life, or MIL. Now, MIL is defined as the subjective evaluation that one's existence has significance, purpose, and coherence. But here is the kicker. The researchers didn't treat meaning in life as some abstract philosophical poetry. No way. They treated it as a highly practical cognitive coping resource. It is a functional tool that our brains use to navigate chaos.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the actual mechanics of meaning playing out. You can see how multifaceted this whole concept is. It mobilizes cognitive components like sense-making, motivational components like self-regulation, and affective components like regulating negative emotions. All of these feed directly into our problem-focused and meaning-focused coping strategies, effectively acting like a giant shield that significantly reduces our ultimate distress.
Through these 5 studies, the researchers discovered that people with high meaning in life consistently rely on 3 specific strategies across all types of stressors. First, positive reinterpretation, which is finding the hidden benefit in a hassle. Second, proactive planning, actually taking steps to fix the problem rather than just sitting there worrying about it. And third, coping self-efficacy. That's that deep inner confidence that you actually have the ability to handle whatever the world is throwing at you today.
Okay, let's look at Section 5, From Threat to Challenge.
Let's see how this builds, because it really all comes down to how we appraise an event. Without meaning, we tend to make what they call threat appraisals. We view a stressor as a fundamental danger, and that leads straight to emotion-focused panic, denial, avoidance, and a whole lot of distress. But meaning in life shifts our perspective to challenge appraisals. When you view your life as purposeful and coherent, a sudden deadline isn't a threat to your survival, right? It's a challenge. And viewing it as a challenge unlocks all that proactive problem-solving we just talked about.
This sense of meaning actually operates across a timeline. In the past, it provides a cognitive framework to reconcile negative events, allowing us to integrate those bad experiences into our life story. In the present, it helps us make sense of our daily hassles, keeping us grounded right now. And for the future, it gives us goal orientation and planning. Having that coherent narrative helps you process where you've been, handle the annoyances of today, and strategically plan for tomorrow's success.
And here is absolutely the coolest finding from the daily diary studies the researchers conducted. It's a two-way street. Meaning in life predicts that you will use adaptive coping strategies today. But if you actually use those adaptive coping strategies to proactively solve problems today, it increases your meaning in life tomorrow. It's a total bidirectional relationship. Meaning and coping form this compounding resilience loop that just grows stronger and stronger over time.
Which brings our metaphor completely full circle. Remember how the classical singers use their repertoire, like Beethoven and Schubert, as a literal laboratory to practice their emotional regulation? Well, we can use our daily annoyances in the exact same way. That frustrating typing task at work, the delayed train, the incredibly tough exam, they aren't just annoying obstacles, they are your laboratory. They are perfect opportunities to practice your positive reinterpretation and your proactive planning.
So, I'll leave you with this to ponder. Think about the single biggest stressor you are facing right now. How can you step out of the emotion-focused panic, appraise it as a challenge rather than a threat, and apply meaning-focused coping to it today? What is your very first proactive step going to be? Get out there and use your laboratory. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep building that resilience loop. All right, welcome to the explainer. Today we're tackling, honestly, one of the most frustrating universal mysteries of the entire human experience. Why on earth do we procrastinate? You know, why do we set these incredible life-changing goals only to watch them just completely fizzle out a few weeks later? Well, if you're a focused learner looking for the actual mechanics of achievement, we're talking real science here, not just motivational fluff, you are absolutely in the right place. So, let's dive right in.
So, I want you to ask yourself right now, why do our biggest, most ambitious goals fail? We've all been there, right? We've got the desire, we have the grand vision, and yet there's this massive, frustrating disconnect between our ambition and our daily execution. What is actually happening inside our brains when we hit that wall?
While we all know this scene perfectly, it's New Year's Eve, you're buzzing with excitement, and you announce to everyone that this is the year. You're finally going to lose the 20 pounds, run that marathon, or write that novel. For a fleeting moment, literally anything feels possible. But fast forward a week later, and what happens? The gym bag is back in the closet, just gathering dust. The laptop is shut tight. Now, we usually blame this on laziness, right? We beat ourselves up over it. But the research actually shows something entirely different. And this is a total neuropsychological mythbuster, so listen closely. Procrastination is not laziness. According to neuropsychotherapist Britt Frank, our brains are hardwired for efficiency and survival, not necessarily for health or success. So when you take on a massive new goal, your brain kind of glitches. It actually can't easily distinguish between the threat level of a literal lion approaching and a huge assignment being due. It senses this massive pattern interruption, hits the panic button, and throws us into a literal freeze response. It just says, nope, absolutely not doing this today. To bypass that ancient survival mechanism, we're going to need a completely different kind of fuel.
Which brings us to part 1, unlocking self-efficacy.
And this right here is the real psychological engine of true success. Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the difference between confidence and self-efficacy. Confidence is just a general, vague feeling. You know, you can be a generally confident person but still completely bomb at a specific task. Self-efficacy, which was introduced by Stanford psychologist Albert Bandura, is hyper-specific. It's your scientifically grounded belief in your capacity to execute a very specific task to get a specific outcome. It's not just saying, I feel good about myself today. It's saying, I know I can deliver this presentation because I have the exact skills required to pull it off.
So Bandura identified 4 main pillars to build this powerful self-efficacy. Number 1 is mastery experiences, actually doing the things successfully. Number 2 is vicarious experiences, essentially having role models. 3 is verbal persuasion, which is receiving credible, real encouragement. And 4 is managing your emotional states. Now, all 4 of these definitely matter, but the research is incredibly clear on this. First-hand mastery experiences are the absolute strongest factor, hands down. Literally nothing convinces your brain that you can do something quite like actually going out and achieving it firsthand.
But what if you're just starting out and you don't have that mastery yet? Well, that's where vicarious experiences become absolutely vital. Seeing people similar to yourself succeed through sustained effort acts like a mental blueprint. If you see a relatable role model struggle, push through the anxiety, and eventually succeed, it actually teaches your brain that setbacks are completely normal and totally manageable. It proves to your subconscious that, hey, you too possess the capabilities to master comparable activities. But how do we practically build those mastery experiences in our own lives without triggering our brain's internal alarm system? How do we bypass that freeze response we talked about earlier?
Let's look at part 2, the power of small wins.
We do it by using the incredible power of small wins. And you have to consider this wild statistic from high-performance research. Only 12% of our brain power is handled by our conscious mind. Just 12. That's our monkey mind, the part that sits around setting those big, lofty goals. The remaining 88%, that is entirely subconscious. So when you try to force a massive change overnight, that tiny 12% is trying to drag a kicking and screaming 88% into the complete unknown. Honestly, it's no wonder we get overwhelmed and completely shut down.
So the workaround here is a tactic called decomposition. We have to break tasks down into what Britt Frank calls micro yeses. We literally need to make the first step so ridiculously small that your subconscious doesn't even register it as a threat. Like if your goal is to go for a massive run and your brain just freezes up, your micro yes might literally just be put one sock on your foot, that's it. It's a task so incredibly tiny that it completely prevents the brain's fear response from ever activating.
And this process builds a real neurological positive feedback loop. First, you figure out the absolute tiniest first step. Second, get out of your head. Seriously, stop analyzing why you're procrastinating and just look at that one tiny step. And third, just do it. Because when you complete even a microscopic chunk of a task, it creates momentum. It sparks actual dopamine in the brain, giving you a natural biological hit of motivation. Psychologist Jeffrey Bernstein points out something huge here. Motivation doesn't precede action, it actually follows it. Action is what creates the motivation to keep going. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, putting on a sock is great for daily chores, but does this actually work when everything is on the line? Well, let's shift over to the extreme end of the human spectrum to find out.
This is part 3, building mental toughness.
We're going to look at Navy SEALs and extreme endurance athletes right now, just to prove that these exact same psychological mechanics apply under the most intense pressure imaginable. In SEAL Fit training, former Navy SEAL Mark Devine teaches that the very first step to ultimate mental toughness is permanently removing the quit option, period. Quitting and training might get you a warm blanket and a cup of coffee right now, but you have to live with that regret forever. In life or death situations, quitting just simply isn't an option. By closing the back door entirely, your brain is actually forced to adapt to the hardship instead of constantly looking for an escape route. And that leads directly to what Devine calls the 20x factor.
Think about Navy SEAL Hell Week. Candidates endure over 100 hours of continuous training with almost zero sleep. Now, most people's 12% conscious mind is screaming that this is physically impossible. But once the mind accepts that quitting is completely off the table, the body and the subconscious actually adapt. You learn that you are truly capable of at least 20 times more than your self-imposed limitations ever allowed you to believe. It's mind-blowing.
But seriously, how do they actually survive those 100 hours? Well, they definitely don't do it by staring at the finish line. And this shows exactly how high-stakes performers survive utter chaos. They use micro-goals. If you're standing in the freezing surf on a Monday morning, a terrible goal is make it to Friday. Your brain will just freeze. Instead, their goal is just make it to sunrise. Why? Because the sun warms you up and things just look a little bit better in the light. Micro-goal, micro-victory, next. It entirely forces the monkey mind to focus exclusively on the present moment.
Now, throughout all this extreme adversity, your internal dialogue is absolutely critical. At SEALFIT, they ask this really provocative question: what dog are you feeding? The dog of fear or the dog of courage? See, the human mind naturally drifts toward negative programming. It's just what it does. So you have to actively use pattern interrupts, like literally shouting a power statement out loud or physically standing taller, to interdict that negative thinking and jolt your system with positively charged electricity. Positive self-talk isn't just some fluffy self-help advice. It's a tactical necessity. All right, let's bring this powerful explainer back down to earth for a second. You probably aren't going into a combat zone or a 100-hour hell week today, but you definitely have your own high-stakes goals, careers, and personal mountains to climb.
So, let's get into part 4, your daily action plan.
How do we actually implement these elite mechanics into your normal daily life? Well, the first tool in your new arsenal is visual tracking. Tracking your progress religiously transforms all that abstract effort into tangible, dopamine-releasing success. By using something simple like a habit tracker card to mark off every single micro-win, you are literally gathering hard evidence of your own capabilities. It is the ultimate defense against imposter syndrome because you're proving to your brain day after day that you are building real, undeniable self-efficacy.
Next up is automating those micro-wins, and we use author James Clear's brilliant habit stacking template for this. You just find a habit you already do effortlessly, and you stack a brand new micro-habit right on top of it. For example, after I close my car door, I will take 3 deep breaths. Or, after I turn on the shower, I'm going to do 5 burpees. It removes the mental friction entirely, simply because the old habit acts as an automatic trigger for the new one. It's like a chain reaction.
And I really want to emphasize this. No task is too small to build your self-efficacy engine. Just look at these real daily micro-wins. Drink an extra glass of water. Sit quietly for just 2 minutes. Clear exactly 3 emails. Smile at one stranger. If your brain is feeling overwhelmed, you just shrink the goal until the resistance totally disappears. These hyper-specific, super mundane examples are exactly the kind of proximal goals that build massive, unstoppable momentum over time.
So what you should really take away from all of this is that confidence is absolutely not a switch you just flip overnight. True self-efficacy is a cumulative muscle. It's built by proving to yourself through undeniable mastery experiences that you can execute. By decomposing your goals, constantly feeding the dog of courage, and aiming to get just 1% better every single day, you completely bypass your brain's alarm system. And eventually, you become completely unstoppable.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final vital question to answer the exact moment this explainer ends. I want you to look at that massive, intimidating goal you've been procrastinating on. What is your very first micro-win going to be today? Shrink it down, take action, get that dopamine hit, and start building your engine of success right now.
Okay, let's jump right into this explainer with a question that honestly just completely boggles the mind. Have you ever wondered why a staggering 92% of New Year's resolutions just fall apart? Or why 90% of business goals completely fail to cross the finish line? I mean, we spend so much time planning, making these elaborate lists, and setting our sights on the future, yet the failure rate is just astronomical. It's like we're setting ourselves up to lose. So let's dig into the research and figure out exactly what's going wrong. What's really fascinating here is this data from Leadership IQ. When they surveyed thousands of workers, get this, only 15% agreed that their goals actually help them achieve great things. That leaves a massive, glaring 85% motivational gap. Just think about that. Why is that gap so huge? Well, it's because most professionally set goals generate absolutely zero emotional pull. Sure, they look fantastic on a spreadsheet, but they do literally nothing to get you out of bed in the morning. So welcome to our explainer on the architecture of achievement. Today, we're going to explore how to build a pyramid of achievement together. We are completely rebuilding how you approach goal setting, moving all the way from the deepest foundation of your personal values right up to the gritty, everyday reality of daily execution. Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We'll hit 1, the goal failure epidemic. 2, the value goal alignment foundation. 3, smart versus hard goals. 4, the motivation structure bridge. 5, outcome versus process goals. And finally, 6, the 1-3 ratio rule. Let's start right off with section 1, the goal failure epidemic, why results-only thinking burns us out. You know, our traditional models of focusing solely on outcomes are honestly fundamentally broken. Constantly obsessing over results, especially the ones you can't fully control, like market conditions or someone else's decisions, it actually triggers a fight or flight response in your brain. It creates this intense tunnel vision, it spikes your stress and anxiety, and ultimately it just destroys your motivation and ruins your mental health. This whole results-only environment leads to massive burnout because it totally removes the human connection to the work itself.
And that brings us to section 2, the value goal alignment foundation, building the blueprint.
I want you to think of personal values as your internal compass. They are the absolute fundamental beliefs guiding your behavior. When your career goals actually align with these deeply held values, stuff like autonomy, creativity, or serving others, it directly satisfies your psychological needs. And research shows that this alignment is literally your ultimate armor against burnout. It gives you competence and this really profound sense of purpose.
I absolutely love this quote from executive coach and positive psychology expert Valerie Burton. She says, "Stop setting yourself up for stress, anxiety, and obligation, and set yourself up for joy, productivity, and freedom." She's challenging us to stop living under the weight of false guilt and all those shoulds. We've got to stop setting ourselves up for obligation and instead actively choose meaningful, value-driven pursuits over false urgencies. Bottom line, if your goals aren't bringing you joy and freedom, well, you're building on the wrong foundation.
Moving right up our pyramid, let's tackle section 3, smart versus hard goals, clarity versus emotion. Okay, we really need to dismantle this corporate myth that SMART goals are the only tool you'll ever need. SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, they optimize beautifully for trackability and execution. But let's be real, they kind of lack a soul. On the flip side, we have hard goals, coined by Mark Murphy. That stands for heartfelt, animated, required, and difficult. Hard goals optimize for emotional connection. A goal can be perfectly smart, but if it doesn't pass that hard test, you are going to abandon it the very second things get tough.
And there's this really fascinating philosophical conflict between these two frameworks. See, SMART tells you to make goals achievable, which honestly, unintentionally encourages you to just play it safe. But HARD tells you to make goals difficult, demanding that you stretch way past your comfort zone. And decades of research actually back this up, showing that specific, difficult goals consistently drive much, much higher performance than easy, supposedly achievable ones.
That brings us to section 4, the motivation structure bridge combining the frameworks. So, what happens when your boss wants measurable metrics, but you desperately need some heartfelt motivation to keep working at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday? Well, you build a bridge. This 3-step synthesis is incredibly powerful. Step 1, you start with HARD to generate that emotional fuel. Step 2, you wrap SMART structure around it so you can actually track your progress. And step 3, you keep both visible daily. The absolutely crucial point here is that by combining them, you eliminate the failure modes of both frameworks entirely. You get the unyielding drive of a HARD goal paired perfectly with the precise map of a SMART goal.
Now we zoom in to the micro level with section 5, outcome versus process goals, the destination versus the daily action.
This right here is the difference between the destination we want and the daily bricklaying required to actually get there. Having a beautiful target is great, right? But hitting the mark requires what psychologists call implementation intentions. We have to transition smoothly from that abstract high-level planning into the gritty day-to-day reality of actually hitting that bullseye through execution. And here is a super vital distinction. Outcome goals, think getting a promotion or losing 20 pounds, these are long-term. And honestly, you have pretty low control over them. But process goals, like making 5 client calls a day or exercising for 30 minutes, those are short-term and you have 100% control over them. It's a real game changer. When you focus your energy on the actions you can absolutely control, your self-efficacy and resilience literally skyrocket. Let's move to our final pillar, section 6, the 1-3 ratio rule, balancing your ambitions.
This is a really concrete mathematical formula that connects your biggest vision directly to what you're doing tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Basically, for every one outcome goal you have, it must be rigorously supported by at least 3 controllable process goals. For example, if the outcome goal is doubling the client retention rate, that's a fantastic destination. But the vehicle to actually get there, those are the 3 process goals: sending a weekly value newsletter, conducting monthly check-ins with your top 20%, and addressing feedback within 24 hours. And the best part? These are all entirely in your control.
Now, to make sure you don't fall off the wagon, keep these rapid-fire troubleshooting tips in mind. First, focus 80% of your attention purely on the process, not the outcome. Schedule strict weekly reviews to stay on track, use simple habit trackers so you can visually see your wins, and most importantly, apply the 80% consistency rule. Listen to me on this one. Consistency absolutely trumps perfection. If you are hitting your process goals 80% of the time, the outcome is naturally going to take care of itself.
I want to conclude with this provocative question, inspired by the brilliant Valerie Burton. Are you setting the right goals or just the obvious ones? Seriously, think about it. Are you chasing results that just look good on paper? Or are you actually building a life aligned with your deepest values? Take what you've learned from this explainer today. Combine that powerful emotional fuel of hard goals with the crystal clarity of SMART goals. Focus on the daily process and go rethink your ambitions. You've got the architecture now. It's time to start building.
Welcome to this explainer. Look, we are going to completely dismantle everything you thought you knew about bouncing back from failure today. For years, we've all been sold this idea that pushing through a setback is just a matter of grinding it out, right? You just grip the steering wheel a little tighter and force yourself to be tougher. Well, today we're unpacking the actual science and psychology behind resilience. And I promise you, the real mechanisms of bouncing back are entirely different from what popular culture has been telling us.
So have you ever noticed that literally everyone fails, but the way we recover is just drastically different? Let's say you set a goal. Maybe you want to work out, start journaling, or eat healthier. You start out incredibly strong. But then, life happens. You miss a day, and suddenly you completely drop the habit. Sometimes you're out by day 3. Yet you look around and see other people facing those exact same life interruptions, and they just seem to recover effortlessly. They decide they're going to do something, and they follow through like it's second nature. Why do some people completely spiral while others just keep on going? To figure that out, we have to look at this amazing metaphor from a recent medical paper published in the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research. It hits the nail on the head. True resilience isn't about being a stiff sword that shatters before a storm. It's about being a supple reed that bends without breaking. It's not about this rigid, macho toughness. It's actually about neuroplasticity. That's your brain's remarkable ability to wire and rewire itself. It's about cognitive reorganization and adaptation.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We're covering 1. The anatomy of failure. 2. Self-compassion beats self-esteem. 3. Wiring habits for resilience. 4. Achieving post-traumatic growth. And 5. Your failure recovery protocol. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The anatomy of failure, myth versus reality. We absolutely need to start by looking at a major cultural paradigm shift regarding how we process our own setbacks.
For decades, we've been fed the myth of willpower. We are told that overcoming failure means you have to be incredibly hard on yourself. That if you fail, well, you just didn't want it badly enough, and you need to grind through with sheer, exhausting willpower. But the empirical data proves that's just not true. Psychiatrist Dr. Tracy Marks points out that successful habit builders aren't somehow better people, and they definitely don't have stronger willpower. Instead, they rely on the science of automation. They work with their brain's natural tendencies rather than trying to overpower them. Willpower is reactive and finite, but automation, that is proactive and enduring.
Moving on to Section 2, self-compassion beats self-esteem. This brings us to how we actually talk to ourselves when we do inevitably fail. We're going to look at some fascinating psychological research led by Yuki Miyagawa on how we treat our own weaknesses.
Now, what is really wild here is the distinct contrast between self-esteem and self-compassion. We usually think highly of self-esteem, right? But the research shows that self-esteem actually makes us defensive. When you have high self-esteem, failure feels like an aversive threat to your self-worth. It's something shameful that you have to avoid at all costs. But self-compassion is an entirely different ballgame. Self-compassion lets us view failure as an adaptive learning opportunity. Because you aren't tying your entire personal worth to the outcome, you suddenly have the emotional stability to look at a failure objectively and just say, okay, how do I grow from this? This was brilliantly proven in an experiment with over 120 undergrads. Researchers asked them to recall a personal weakness. One group wrote a compassionate message to themselves about it. Another group was told to pump themselves up and focus on their strengths. And a control group was given the surprisingly random task of just listing Japanese prefectures, because, well, why not? The results were totally eye-opening. The group that practiced self-compassion grew more resilient and viewed failure as a chance for growth. But get this, the group that tried to boost their self-esteem by focusing on their strengths actually experienced an increase in harsh self-judgment. It made them view failure as a massive threat. Trying to suppress your weakness by hyper-focusing on your strengths can absolutely backfire.
All right, Section 3, Wiring Habits for Resilience. So the key takeaway here is that once we stop judging ourselves and remove that threat response to failure, we can actually start rewiring our physical brains. When you want to bounce back, you have to understand the basal ganglia. Think of this as your brain's autopilot system. Dr. Marks notes that people who bounce back easily have successfully managed to delegate their decisions to this exact region of the brain. They don't have to wake up and consciously drum up the motivation to get back on track after they mess up. Their recovery is already encoded into the basal ganglia, which means it flows with little to literally no conscious effort. So how do you encode the basal ganglia? You stop relying on willpower and you start relying on environmental design. Look, if you're trying to eat healthier, but your fridge is empty and there's a takeout menu sitting right on the counter, your willpower is gonna fail, for sure. But environmental design, like prepping your meals on Sunday, or setting your workout clothes out the night before, or just leaving your journal right on your pillow, that makes the desired behavior the path of least resistance. You are literally placing physical cues in your path to nudge your brain in the right direction. And this perfectly illustrates the absolute power of identity in habit formation. People who bounce back tell themselves a totally different story. If you say, I am trying to write every day, you're framing the habit as an external task. It's a chore. But if you say, I am a writer, you tap into your identity. When your behavior aligns with your self-image, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, actually works harder to protect and maintain that habit. You aren't just doing a task anymore, you are being who you are. Section 4, Achieving Post-Traumatic Growth. Let's zoom out from our daily habits for a second and see how these exact same concepts apply to massive, life-altering crises. What happens when life just completely shatters? According to research from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, when individuals face severe health emergencies or physical traumas, resilience is not just the absence of sorrow or fear. It is the active, deliberate reorganization of your cognition. Just like rewiring a daily habit, dealing with trauma requires a psychological reorganization to restore your belief in your own self-efficacy. It is taking that supple read concept we talked about to its absolute limit, shifting from passive survival to active positive adjustment, which ultimately leads to what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. Finally, Section 5, Your Failure Recovery Protocol. Time to take all this neurobiology, psychology, and academic research and turn it into a practical, everyday toolkit for you to use right now. This is called if-then planning, and it's basically the foundation of bouncing back. Vague goals fail. You need clarity. If-then planning gives your brain a specific cue and a specific behavior to shift you from a reactive state to a proactive state. For example, if I miss my morning meditation, then I will do a 1-minute breathing exercise at my desk. You are deciding in advance what you will do when, not if, you slip up. It gives your brain the exact clarity it needs to encode that basal ganglia we were talking about earlier. And we can pull directly from the playbooks of highly successful entrepreneurs to round out your personal failure recovery protocol. When a business venture fails, the best founders out there don't beat themselves up. They reframe failure as feedback. They analyze the root causes without that harsh self-judgment. They seek guidance. They break complex challenges down into iterative experiments, and they celebrate the tiny wins to build momentum back up. They know that a missed day or a failed launch isn't the end of the process. It literally is the process. Which brings us to the ultimate question. The next time you fail, whether that's breaking a 3-day streak on a new habit, facing a setback at work, or navigating a massive life crisis, how are you going to respond? Will you be the stiff sword, relying on exhausting willpower and harsh self-judgment until you finally shatter? Or will you be the supple reed? I want to leave you with this to challenge your identity.
Ask yourself right now how you will design your environment, practice self-compassion, and program your mind to bend, learn, and grow when the storm hits. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time. Imagine for a second that physical wave of panic you get right before you're called on in a high-stakes meeting. You know the feeling, right? Your heart's racing, your palms are getting sweaty. Now, what if I told you that overcoming that feeling doesn't actually require some massive personality overhaul? What if confidence isn't just something you're born with, but it's actually a muscle? A muscle you can train in short 15-minute bursts every single day.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the absolutely fascinating science of micro-bravery. We're going to look at how taking tiny, calculated risks can literally rewire your brain's fear response. The core concept we're exploring today is honestly incredibly empowering. Confidence is entirely learnable. It's a structured process, and we're going to map the whole thing out together.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the science of self-belief. Second, rewiring the fear response. Third, the magic of micro-bravery. Fourth, winning at workplace anxiety. And finally, proof that it works. Starting off with Section 1, the science of self-belief. To really build confidence, we first need to understand the psychological mechanics of how we actually construct belief in our own capabilities. And this brings us to a foundational concept in psychology, developed by Stanford University's Albert Bandura. It's called self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is defined as an individual's belief in their capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance outcomes. Notice how hyper-targeted that is? It's not just, generally feeling good about who you are. It's the concrete, solid belief that you can execute a specific task or a plan of action, whether that's giving a presentation, running a marathon, or just learning a new piece of software. And looking at this brilliantly illustrates a massive misconception most of us have. We constantly confuse self-esteem with self-efficacy, but they're totally different. Self-esteem is your overall sense of self-worth. It's super broad. Self-efficacy, on the other hand, is your belief in your ability to succeed at one very specific task. You can actually have really high self-esteem, but incredibly low self-efficacy when it comes to, say, public speaking. Understanding this difference is exactly how we start to target and ultimately conquer our specific fears. To put a real human face on this academic theory, let's look at a story shared by a woman named Brittany Lee on the Lemonade app. 7 years ago, she was divorced, a single mom, literally $0 to her name, and facing intense judgment from people close to her. She was absolutely terrified and starting from absolute rock bottom. But, as you'll see, this made for a perfect real-world laboratory for building self-efficacy entirely from scratch. So according to Bandura, we have 4 primary ways to build this self-efficacy. First, you have vicarious experiences, which is just watching others succeed. Then you have verbal persuasion, basically receiving encouragement from people. And you have your physiological states, which involves reframing your physical anxiety into something like excitement. But the most powerful source by far, mastery experiences. This means actually doing the hard thing, pushing through the fear, and experiencing personal success firsthand. Because honestly, nothing convinces your brain of your capability quite like actual undeniable proof. Connecting Brittany's story back to the science here, we can see a massive mastery experience in action. With horrible credit, rising rent prices, and literally zero outside help, she still managed to secure her own apartment. She wrote that this was the very first time she was living completely on her own without any help. That achievement wasn't just about getting a roof over her head, right? Psychologically, it was a mastery experience that proved to her own brain that she was fully capable of survival and success. Which brings us to Section 2, rewiring the fear response. Because now that we know we need these mastery experiences, we have to ask what stops us from getting them? Well, it's fear. So let's look at how we actually rewire our brain's natural panic response. You know what's really fascinating? Conquering fear like this is definitely not a modern invention. Way back in the 9th century, the Persian polymath Abu Zayd al-Balkhi wrote about treating fear by repeatedly forcing oneself near the scary thing until the fear is lost. Think about that. Humans have known the secret to battling fear for over a millennium. Today, we just call this exposure therapy. Modern clinicians use a few different types of exposure therapy to weaken those stubborn neural connections between our triggers and our panic. This ranges from in vivo, which is confronting real-life situations, to imaginal exposure, where you vividly visualize the feared outcome in your head. We even use virtual reality for simulations now. And there's interoceptive exposure, which is all about confronting physical sensations, like an elevated heart rate, but in a totally safe environment. All of these have one big goal: to break the pattern of avoidance.
This leads us to a highly effective technique called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. ERP involves confronting a feared stimulus while purposefully refraining from your usual escape response. The absolutely crucial point here is this concept of inhibitory learning. See, the goal of exposure isn't necessarily to magically erase the fear completely. Instead, it's to balance that existing fear with new learning. You're giving your brain hard evidence that the terrible outcome you're predicting won't actually happen, and proving that you can actually tolerate the distress. We can totally see this exposure in action when we look back at Brittany's journey. She took this massive step and became a brand ambassador for a photographer. Now, she admitted she was utterly terrified of rejection and worried she'd disappoint people. But instead of escaping that fear, instead of giving in to the urge to quit and run away, she stayed in the situation. By choosing not to run, she allowed that new inhibitory learning to take place. And ultimately, she found lifelong friendships and immense self-love.
Okay, moving to Section 3, the magic of micro-bravery. Taking on a brand ambassador role or signing a lease are huge steps. How do we apply this to everyday life? Let's zoom in on author Tom Kelly's highly practical framework.
Look, most of us are constantly waiting for a moment of big bravery. You know, a bold leap of faith or some dramatic, rare decision. But waiting around for that massive leap is a trap. It's just too overwhelming. The shift we actually need to make is toward micro-bravery. We're talking small, doable actions that cause only mild discomfort. It's consistent, it's daily, it is the everyday practice of gently stretching your comfort zone, rather than trying to completely shatter it all at once.
I absolutely love this insight from Tom Kelly. He says identity doesn't shift when you think differently, it shifts when you behave differently. I mean, wow. You cannot simply think your way into being a confident person. Every single act of micro-bravery provides your brain with tangible physical evidence that you are someone who takes action. It proves to your nervous system beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can handle discomfort. So, how long does a micro-brave move actually take? Just 15 minutes, maybe 30 at the absolute most. And that is the beauty of it. It's sending that one specific email you've been avoiding. It's speaking up just one time in a meeting. It's saying no to a request without over-explaining yourself. It's a low-resistance, highly repeatable action that builds your mastery experiences one tiny block at a time. Let's see how this builds into our professional lives with Section 4, Winning at Workplace Anxiety. The workplace is basically a gauntlet of potential triggers, so let's look at how to apply these tools specifically for office fears. First off, we really need to acknowledge just how common this is. A full 15% of working adults experience social anxiety disorder. If you get a racing heartbeat, a trembling voice, or sweaty palms right before a project update, you are absolutely not alone. It's a very real physiological response, and it causes so many professionals to avoid speaking up or taking on high-visibility projects, which unfortunately can really stall careers. To combat this, the AHEAD app outlines 5 extremely actionable steps that perfectly combine Bandora's self-efficacy theory with Kelly's micro-bravery. Number 1, strategic preparation, basically reducing uncertainty by just having a few talking points ready to go. 2, in-the-moment grounding. Think of the 5-4-3-2-1 method, where you silently identify things you can see, feel, and hear just to calm your nerves. 3 is gradual exposure practice. This is your micro-bravery in action. You start by emailing a question and work your way up to speaking in the actual meeting. 4, cognitive reframing, actively challenging those negative thoughts with real evidence. And finally, 5, building a strategic support network of trusted colleagues around you. And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, Proof that it works. We've covered the theory and the daily frameworks. Now let's look at the real-world results of consistently applying these principles. Let's check back in with Brittany from our earlier slides. By stacking these small, micro-brave moments over time, she completely transformed her reality. The result? Well, she pushed through the terror of rejection and launched her own business. She overcame the fear of judgment from her past, and now she actually uses her own mastery experiences to coach other women to do exactly the same thing. Her identity shifted entirely, all because her behavior shifted first. As Brittany herself wrote on Lemonade, No matter what you are scared of, keep pushing through the fear. I promise it will be worth it. Really let that emotional takeaway sink in for a second. Facing your fears using microbravery isn't just some clinical exercise and exposure therapy. It is a deeply rewarding path to becoming the person you actually want to be. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative question. What is one 15-minute micro-brave move you are actively avoiding right now that you could literally go do today? Don't wait around for a moment of massive courage. Pick something small, expect a little bit of discomfort, and apply the science. Go take that first step toward your new identity today.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am so absolutely thrilled you're hanging out with me today because, let's face it, we're diving into something that affects literally every single one of us. We are going to unpack the fascinating science of bouncing back. We're taking a journey from that crushing weight of daily stress, you know the feeling, all the way to mastering the really deep biological and psychological science of lifelong resilience. We've got some incredible source material to guide us today, so get ready to figure out how to actively build up your mental muscle.
Okay, picture this. Have you ever been lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, replaying some incredibly awkward conversation you had with a barista at 2 a.m.? Or maybe you're sitting at your desk, your inbox is already overflowing, you get just one more urgent message marked ASAP, and suddenly, boom, sheer panic sets in. It's such a universally relatable problem, right? Anxiety just doesn't always announce itself. It kind of just sneaks in through the back door.
And man, when it sneaks in, you feel it physically way before your logical brain even registers what's going on. The chest tightens, the mind starts racing, the spiral begins. It is this intense, visceral fight or flight sensation. Out of nowhere, anxiety just completely hijacks our thoughts, and suddenly the absolute smallest tasks, like, I don't know, just replying to an email, feel completely impossible, like there's just no room to even breathe.
Section 1. The anxiety spiral, interrupting the chaos. Okay, let's dive into this because actually understanding what happens during that crazy overwhelm is step 1 to beating it. When we get swept up in those racing thoughts, our nervous system completely goes into overdrive. We just start reacting on pure autopilot, which honestly usually just makes the whole spiral spin faster and faster.
Which brings us to Section 2, the stop technique, mindful circuit breaker. Even right in the middle of all that chaos, there is a way to hit the brakes. It's an immediate, highly actionable solution, and the best part? It requires absolutely zero special training. Let's break down exactly how this works.
The true beauty of this framework is just how simple it is. Step 1, literally, stop. Just pause whatever you're doing, even for a single beat. Step 2, take a breath. Deliberately shift your focus to a slow, deep inhale and exhale just to cool the engines down. Step 3, observe. What's happening inside you? Maybe your chest is tight. What's going on around you? Just notice it without judging it. And finally, step 4, proceed. Now you get to decide what to do next. This tiny, brief pause is a real game changer because it allows us to step forward with actual intention rather than just reacting defensively on autopilot.
And the benefits of this tiny little pause? Absolutely profound. Practicing stop literally interrupts your body's fight or flight response. It acts like a giant reset button. It clears our thinking by breaking up those mental spirals, it regulates our emotional steadiness, and honestly, it's just a profound act of self-kindness. But here is the most important takeaway for our journey today. Making this a regular microhabit actively builds up your long-term resilience.
Now, I really want to be clear here. This isn't just some trendy internet life hack. The stop technique is a proven, hardcore, evidence-based tool rooted in established behavioral therapies. We're talking cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. It's actively taught as a distress tolerance tool, meaning it's specifically designed to help you literally tolerate intense emotional distress without making the situation any worse. It grounds you right here in the present moment.
Section 3, psychological resilience, building mental muscle. So we've got this incredible micro tool, right? But how does all of this scale up? Let's pivot and look at the macro level. Because these little micro moments of emotional regulation, they are actively building a much larger psychological muscle over time. They are the foundational building blocks of something much, much grander.
Psychological resilience is formally defined as the ability to cope mentally with a crisis and return to a pre-crisis status quickly. Now, I want to break this down because this is absolutely crucial. Resilience is not about completely avoiding stress. In fact, the research tells us that navigating everyday routine stressors actually helps promote resilience. It's not about living a life totally free of trauma.
It's about positive adaptation when trauma inevitably happens.
Now, what's really interesting here is how researcher Anne Maston describes this. She calls resilience ordinary magic. I absolutely love that phrasing. Resilience isn't some rare mythical superpower granted to a lucky few. No way. It is a completely natural human adaptive system, shaped by millions of years of biological and cultural evolution. It's ordinary, sure, but its effects? Pure magic.
So let's trace how we actually discovered this magic. The first real research on this kicked off back in the 1970s with psychologist Emmy Werner. She started this groundbreaking 40-year longitudinal study in Kauai, Hawaii. By the 1980s, resilience had really emerged as a major research topic, especially when looking at kids facing severe adversity. And over the decades, the scientific focus shifted. We stopped seeing resilience as just some fixed personality trait you're born with and started understanding it as a dynamic process, something we can actively build.
The most crucial takeaway from Emmy Werner's Kauai study really comes down to this fraction right here, 1/3. Werner was studying children growing up in severe poverty with significant family adversity, and she found that roughly 1/3 of these highly at-risk youths didn't go down a destructive path. Instead, they developed into highly well-adjusted adults. Why? Because they had what researchers call protective factors in their personalities and their environments. In other words, they had that ordinary magic.
Section 4. The Science of Resilience. Biology of Bouncing Back. So what exactly makes up those protective factors? Let's move from the history into the biology and eagerly transition into the fascinating biological and cultural mechanisms that actually fuel our ability to recover. Because let me tell you, the science of bouncing back goes really, really deep. Believe it or not, our brains naturally use biological armor to combat stress. We have neurotransmitters like dopamine acting as these primary buffers. When we cope well with something, we actually see increased activation in the prefrontal cortex and even structural changes in the hippocampus. And incredibly, research indicates that resilience is even influenced by epigenetic modifications. That means our successful adaptations can literally change how our genes are expressed. How wild is that?
Oh, and here is a totally surprising fact from the research that I just had to share. Finding ways to elicit positive emotions, specifically humor, actually has real, measurable physiological consequences. Finding something funny leads to improvements in immune system functioning and literally increases vital antibodies in our saliva. So a good laugh is literally defending your body on a cellular level.
And this brilliantly illustrates that resilience isn't just a biological thing, it's a cultural thing too. Individualist cultures tend to bounce back by focusing heavily on self-reliance, personal traits, and independence. Collectivist cultures, on the other hand, emphasize pooling resources, maintaining community harmony, and relying on deep social support networks. And research on natural disasters shows us that both of these approaches have really unique strengths. There is absolutely no single right way to bounce back.
Section 5. Building long-term resilience. Developing the process. Okay, so knowing the biology and the cultural variations, how do we actively develop and sustain our own resilience over a whole lifetime? How do we construct those essential protective factors for ourselves and for our communities?
Well, resilience building can come from surprisingly specific places. Take this fascinating case study. Research by the British Council found an incredibly powerful relationship between language learning and resilience, particularly for refugees who are integrating into new host communities. Just the act of learning and communicating in a new language provides profound protective factors. It develops a shared identity, opens up access to education, builds social cohesion, and critically, gives people the vocabulary and the tools to articulate and address their trauma.
So let's bring all this amazing macro science full circle right back to the STOP technique we started with. Remember step 4 of STOP? Proceed. Building lifelong resilience, whether that means learning a whole new language, processing deep trauma, or literally just handling a completely overflowing inbox on a Monday morning, starts with breaking overwhelming challenges down. Don't focus on finish the massive project, just focus on open the document. Hit STO, take a breath, and choose your next tiny, manageable move today.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Think about the very next time you feel that sudden chest tightness and you feel that familiar anxiety sneak in. How will you reframe it? Are you going to let the autopilot take over? Or will you use the STOP technique, activate your prefrontal cortex, lean on your social support system, and embrace your own ordinary magic? The power to bounce back is already right there inside you. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer.
Welcome back to The Explainer. So if you're feeling like your mental energy is just running on fumes right now, and honestly, every new email hitting your inbox feels like a personal threat, You are in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking some pretty complex psychological research and translating it into highly actionable micro-habits to help you deal with the stress of modern life. We're going to build up your mental fortitude, and we're not doing it with sweeping, completely overwhelming life changes, but through tiny, strategic actions.
Think of today's agenda as your brand new mental investment portfolio. We're going to define the resilience bank account, look at the power of routine, rewire negative thoughts, conquer social anxiety, and then compound all of that with gratitude. Let's dive right in.
All right, Section 1, the Resilience Bank Account. We really need to start framing mental health exactly like a financial portfolio, one that needs constant, intentional attention.
So, this idea comes from Dr. Michael Madaus, and honestly, it's a brilliant metaphor that completely shifts how we think about mental toughness. See, resilience isn't just some fixed genetic trait that you're either lucky enough to have or you don't. It's actually a dynamic, living reserve. Just like a literal bank account, if you only ever make withdrawals, through stress, anxiety, daily friction, and you never make any deposits, you're going to go bankrupt, period. We have to actively build this reserve through small, daily deposits of healthy habits.
And the hard neuroscience backing this up is absolutely fascinating. Neurons that fire together, wire together. You've probably heard that phrase before. When we go through chronic stress, our brain essentially builds superhighways for anxiety, so our reactions become totally automatic. But the incredible news here is that we can actively wire new, solid pathways. By deliberately practicing positive micro-habits, we are literally reshaping the physical architecture of our brains. How cool is that?
Let's move on to Section 2, the power of routine. This is all about the simplest physical deposits we can make to establish a baseline of control at the very start of our day.
I absolutely love this perspective from Admiral William H. McRaven. He's a battle-hardened Navy SEAL, and he says, if you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. It's kind of crazy, right? A 4-star admiral views this totally mundane chore, the one we all complained about as kids, as the absolute critical first spark of a successful day.
And listen, this is not just about having a tidy room, it's biology. Making your bed releases dopamine. That's your brain's feel-good chemical, which actively reinforces your brain to keep being productive. It gives you immediate structure and environmental control. And once you have a routine locked in, you drastically decrease your daily decision fatigue, which conserves your mental energy for the actual big problems. In fact, research done during the COVID-19 pandemic showed that families who maintained high levels of daily routines actively buffered their stress. It literally preserved their resilience.
Okay, Section 3. Rewiring your negative thoughts. Now that our physical environment is structured, let's look at the internal environment, the cognitive deposits, how we process the world and talk to ourselves. You might be familiar with the transformative work of Dr. Carol Dweck here. A fixed mindset looks at a hard challenge and just declares, I can't do this. It assumes our abilities are static and unchangeable. But a growth mindset simply adds one tiny, incredibly powerful word, yet. Saying, I can't do this yet, completely rewires your brain's approach to failure. It shifts you away from seeking validation and moves you right into seeking development.
But what happens when those negative thoughts just get too loud? Well, we can turn to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT techniques. The UK's National Health Service recommends this really simple 3-step reframing process. Step 1, you literally step back from the situation mentally. Give yourself some distance. Step 2, you act like a scientist. Examine the actual evidence for your unhelpful thoughts. Ask yourself, are these facts or are they just fears? And finally, Step 3, reframe it. Break that vicious cycle by exploring alternative ways to look at the problem. Doing this is a massive cognitive deposit.
All right, Section 4, conquering your social anxiety. Let's transition from our internal thoughts back to the external world, targeting how to make social deposits when interacting with people feels utterly overwhelming.
Overcoming social fear is never ever about taking an immediate, terrifying leap into the deep end. You don't start by getting up and giving a keynote speech. It is a gradual, step-by-step exposure process. You start with something incredibly low stakes, maybe just brief eye contact with the cashier. Once you master that, you graduate to greeting a neighbor, then doing some small talk at a coffee break. Eventually, you build up the capital to ask a question in a high-stakes meeting. You are just slowly, consistently proving to your brain that the environment is safe.
And while you do this, you have to manage your amygdala. That's your brain's danger filter.
If you're socially anxious, your amygdala falsely detects a threat where there actually isn't one, and it floods your body with stress hormones. To calm that false alarm down, practice deep, slow breathing right from your belly, not your chest. That biologically signals safety to your nervous system. Prepare a few small talk topics in advance so your mind doesn't just go blank. Challenge your worst-case scenario predictions by actively recalling times you succeeded socially in the past. And honestly, consider connecting with a support group just to remind yourself that you're not alone in this fight.
Section 5. Compounding with gratitude. This is where we round out our resilience portfolio with emotional deposits, focusing on that internal grace we need to sustain long-term mental health.
Psychologist Dr. Kristin Neff has a really powerful framework for this, built on 3 key elements. First up is self-kindness. This means replacing that harsh inner critic with a completely non-judgmental voice. Second is mindfulness, observing your uncomfortable emotions without ignoring them, but crucially, without exaggerating them into a total catastrophe. And third, common humanity. Just accepting that making mistakes is a universal part of being human. And get this, practicing these 3 elements actively lowers your stress hormone, cortisol, and it literally lights up your brain's reward centers.
Which brings us basically to the golden rule of self-compassion. Think about it, if your best friend made a mistake, there is no way you would call them worthless or stupid. You would offer them encouragement, right? We have to stop the harsh self-put-downs and actively start speaking to ourselves in the exact same way we would speak to a mentor, a loved one, or a good friend.
Now we pair that self-compassion with daily gratitude. And hey, I want to be super clear here. This is not about toxic positivity. It's not about ignoring real, difficult challenges. It's about training your brain to recognize the good stuff that coexists alongside the hard times. Try jotting down 3 to 5 simple things you're grateful for each day. Send a quick text thanking someone who made an impact on you. When you do your deep breathing exercises, pair your exhales with a thankful thought. These micro habits literally rewire your brain to naturally start scanning the world for the positive.
Small daily deposits earn compound interest. Making your bed, throwing the word yet into your vocabulary, holding brief eye contact, taking deep belly breaths, and treating yourself like a friend. None of these take immense, back-breaking effort on their own, but consistency with these small daily deposits earns massive compound interest. Over time, they create a completely undeniable reserve of mental fortitude.
So, I want to leave you with this one vital question to answer for yourself right now. What small deposit are you going to make into your resilience bank account today? Seriously, don't wait for tomorrow. Pick just one micro habit we discussed and take control of your mental well-being right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating mental switch that separates panic from power when a crisis hits. Honestly, if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by an unexpected setback, you are exactly in the right place.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty crucial question. What actually happens in your head during that 3 a.m. worry spiral over a crashed project or a blown deadline? Why does your mind just go completely blank right when you need it the most?
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to define your mental lens, explore the neuroscience of solutions, navigate the resilience river, talk about rewiring the brain, and finally, cultivate a resilient future. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Defining your mental lens and how we view the world. Before we can rewire anything, we've got to figure out exactly what we mean when we say mindset.
Now, the textbook definition of a mindset is basically just an established set of attitudes. But if we look at it through the lens of cognitive psychology, your mindset is actually the active cognitive process you use during a task. It's literally the lens that dictates how you react to your past choices, your behaviors, and especially those sudden out-of-nowhere challenges.
You're probably familiar with Carol Dweck's foundational concept here, and it illustrates this perfectly. You essentially have a choice, right? You either operate with a fixed mindset, meaning you see your abilities as completely static and failure as this terrifying threat, or you embrace a growth mindset. With a growth mindset, your brain actually treats failure as incredibly valuable data for your next success. You don't run from the challenge, you lean into it.
Okay, so here's the real kicker. The massive contrast between problem-focused and solution-oriented thinking. When you're problem-focused, obsessing over what's broken, your imagination literally shuts down, and you just bleed mental energy. But, and this is huge, on the flip side, with solution-oriented thinking, your brain's reward system actually lights up. You're not just thinking positively, your brain is actively rewarding you for hunting down answers and connecting distant ideas.
Moving on to Section 2, the neuroscience of solutions. The biology of breakthrough. Let's elevate this from just positive thinking into hard neurobiology. Because what happens inside your head when you make this shift is just wild.
Check this out. Stanford University researchers tracked professionals going through high-stress challenges. They found a mind-blowing 32% reduction in stress hormones the exact moment people reframe their obstacles into solutions, instead of just dwelling on what went wrong.
And it gets better. A study in the Journal of Creative Behavior saw a massive 47% spike in novel ideas when people tackled constraints with a solution-focused mindset. This happens because your brain is literally activating entirely different neural networks to integrate a concrete problem with abstract possibilities.
So, what does this actually mean for your day-to-day career? Well, look at these numbers. Task performance shoots up by 28% when you reframe problems. And even more importantly, Harvard Business Review found that solution-focused professionals experience 64% lower burnout rates. You aren't burning out because you're channeling your energy into building what's next, rather than just fighting reality. Here's why this works. When you treat a problem like a solvable puzzle, your prefrontal cortex just gets flooded with dopamine, instead of those nasty, panic-inducing stress hormones. Your internal threat detection system quiets down, and your strategic thinking center takes total command. You literally become calmer and sharper at the exact same time. It's a total game changer.
All right, Section 3. Navigating the Resilience River, the vehicle for mental shifts. We know the biology is powerful, but how do we actively maintain that state when life inevitably gets rough? The answer is resilience.
The American Psychological Association points out something really important here. Resilience is not some rare genetic superpower you're born with. It's an ordinary, totally learnable process. It's just a collection of behaviors, thoughts, and actions that help you adapt and bounce back from major adversity.
I absolutely love this metaphor from the APA. Think of navigating life like taking a raft trip down a river. You are inevitably going to hit rapids, sudden turns, and shallows. Thriving on this river requires trusted companions, past knowledge, and just pure perseverance to stay afloat when the water gets choppy.
Section 4, Rewiring the Brain, and those 90 days to neuroplasticity. If you want to build a better raft for that river, you have to physically rewire your brain through neuroplasticity.
Let's make this super actionable with the 3-minute Flip the Frame protocol. Minute 1, name it. State your specific stressor out loud to trigger the threat detector. Minute 2, reframe it. Forcefully find the hidden opportunity inside that problem. Minute 3, act on it. Choose just one micro step to take in the next 24 hours to regain cognitive control. This immediate action proves to your brain that you are in the driver's seat.
Now, while that 3-minute protocol is incredibly powerful, we got to remember that building resilience is a really personal journey. Everyone's brain is different, meaning your long-term strategy for hopping over hurdles has to be personalized to your own background, your emotional tendencies, and your unique resources.
And that brings us to Section 5, Cultivating a Resilient Future, Building Your Personal Raft. Keeping that personalization in mind, let's explore exactly how to cultivate this resilience so you're ready for whatever rapids come next. First, the APA says to prioritize strong connections and supportive relationships. You have to stop seeing crises as impossible walls and just accept that change is an unavoidable part of living. Set realistic daily micro steps toward your goals, and above all, take decisive action instead of just wishing the problem away.
Building on that, the second half of the strategy asks you to actively look for opportunities to use hardship for self-discovery. Nurture a positive view of yourself, trust your instincts, and keep a broad, long-term perspective. Maintain a hopeful outlook by actively visualizing what you actually want rather than fearing what you don't. And hey, don't forget to physically take care of your body so your mind stays primed for stress.
I absolutely love this quote because it demands a total identity shift. When you adopt this mindset, you're no longer just a firefighter reacting and scrambling to fix what breaks. You are an architect purposefully engineering breakthroughs.
And as you're building this mental architecture, remember to stay flexible. Resilience is all about balance. It is perfectly okay to step back, to rest, and to feel really strong emotions when things get tough. You don't have to be a robot. You just have to make sure that eventually you step forward again.
I'll leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought to take away today. When you hit your next set of rapids, and you will for sure, are you going to let the problem drown you, or will you step into the raft, flip the frame, and find the solution? The choice and that mental switch is entirely yours.
Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
It's important to take criticism seriously, not personally. You know that quote from Hillary Clinton, shared during a Women in the World Summit, honestly perfectly captures one of the absolute hardest professional and personal skills to master. I mean, we all receive feedback, right? We all face criticism, but how we process it, how we filter it, and ultimately how we use it without letting it totally crush our self-worth, that is a completely different story. Today, we're taking what I like to call an outside-in journey. First, we're going to look at the external forces of harsh feedback and workplace stress, and then we are going to travel deep inward. We're going to build an unbreakable psychological armor so that you can navigate literally any environment with total confidence.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the complex dynamics of navigating criticism and building enduring self-worth. We'll be breaking down real-world workplace behaviors, a little bit of ancient philosophy, and some modern psychology to build a highly practical toolkit for your everyday life.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Redefining harsh criticism. 2. The Stoic Shield. 3. Cultivating a growth mindset. 4. Building workplace resilience. And 5. Finding internal self-worth. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Redefining harsh criticism.
Okay, so before we can properly defend against toxic feedback, we have to understand exactly what it is and why it happens so often in our professional lives. When we get harsh feedback, it usually falls into a very specific category. The concept of radical candor, you've probably heard of it, requires two things simultaneously: caring personally and challenging directly. It's that absolute sweet spot where someone gives you the hard truth, but you know deep down they have your best interests at heart. But right next to it is its dark shadow, obnoxious aggression. This happens when someone challenges you directly, but they completely skip the whole caring personally part. People sometimes call this front stabbing because it really is just a direct attack. But what's really interesting about this distinction is that it helps us realize obnoxious aggression isn't necessarily a permanent personality flaw. It's a behavior. Literally anyone can slip into it.
And honestly, this just goes to show how even the absolute best of us can make this mistake. Kim Scott, the very creator of the Radical Candor framework, shared a wild story about her early days at Google. Basically, she disagreed with Larry Page about an AdSense policy. So what did she do? She fired off this incredibly blunt, accusatory email to about 30 people, including Larry himself, basically implying he only cared about revenue and not the users. She completely skipped humility, she skipped privacy, and she skipped empathy. She later realized she did this because she was viewing Larry as this sort of invincible demigod, not as a real human being deserving of respect and private feedback. So remember, when we are on the receiving end of obnoxious aggression, it usually just means the person delivering it has temporarily forgotten our humanity in that moment.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Stoic Shield. Since we know external threats and obnoxious aggression are pretty much guaranteed in life, how do you actually stop an insult from hurting? It's a deeply relatable question, isn't it? I mean, when those harsh words hit your inbox or they get spoken out loud in a meeting, your heart rate spikes instantly and that sting is immediate. But guess what? Thousands of years ago, the Stoic philosophers figured out a system to short-circuit this exact emotional reaction. They believe that it is not the event itself that harms us, but our interpretation of the event.
The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote something brilliant. He said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." I really want you to think about the incredible power of the pause here. When that insult lands, your immediate knee-jerk instinct is to react, to fire back, or maybe to instantly internalize the shame. But by simply delaying your reaction, taking a breath, you reclaim your power. You physically create a space between the stimulus and your response.
We can actually break this down into a super practical three-step process. Step 1, pause. Just delay the reaction exactly like Seneca advised. Step 2, reframe. This is what psychologists call cognitive reframing. You view the insult not as a personal attack, but as an opportunity to practice your patience, or hey, use some humor to disarm it. Remember, other people's opinions are entirely outside your control. And step 3, empathize. As Marcus Aurelius noted back in the day, people who lash out are very often just dealing with their own inner turmoil. If you see their insult as a reflection of their stress, rather than a measurement of your worth, you actually start to feel compassion instead of anger. The insult literally just bounces off.
Which brings us to Section 3, cultivating a growth mindset.
All right, so we've built a shield against the insult itself. But what if the criticism actually contains some truth? To process that truth without crumbling, we really have to look at our underlying mindset. Let's look at the foundational science behind this. Back in 1988, Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck introduced the concept of implicit theories of intelligence. That sounds super academic, but basically, this just refers to the core underlying assumptions we all hold about whether our personal attributes, like our intelligence or our talent, are fixed at birth or whether they are malleable and can actually be changed.
There is a massive, stark contrast in how we approach this. If you have what's called a fixed mindset, you believe your abilities are carved in stone. So if you receive criticism or if you fail at something, it feels like this devastating, permanent judgment of your core worth. You constantly dread looking dumb. But if you cultivate a growth mindset, you fundamentally understand that abilities are developed through effort and persistence. Failure isn't a permanent label. Actually, scratch that, it's not a label at all, it's just data. It's a stepping stone. When you adopt a growth mindset, you don't take criticism personally because you know you are always a work in progress. You actually welcome the challenge because it's making you smarter.
Section 4. Building workplace resilience. So we've talked about isolated feedback in our internal mindsets, but let's apply this to the heavy, everyday reality of our jobs, where stress can slowly chip away at our resilience. We've all been there, and it's a familiar reality for so many of us. A hyper-demanding office environment, huge stacks of documents, crazy tight deadlines, and just the constant pressure of a heavy workload. While a little bit of pressure can totally motivate us, the sheer accumulation of tasks and workplace friction can easily push us to a tipping point where stress just becomes paralyzing. It is in environments exactly like this that we have to be incredibly proactive about protecting our mental health and setting our boundaries.
So, how do we actually survive the overwhelm? Let's dive into a really simple framework, the 4 Ds of stress management. When you feel that wave of panic rising, just stop and categorize your workload. First, ditch the non-essential tasks. Seriously, just get rid of them. Second, defer the things that can genuinely be postponed. Third, delegate the tasks that someone else can handle. And finally, do the tasks that absolutely must be done right now. This simple framework is a total game changer. It stops you from treating every single email ping like a 5-alarm fire.
There's another really vital concept for both employees and managers here, and it's called the stress bucket. I want you to imagine your personal capacity for stress as a literal bucket. Everyday stressors act like water continuously pouring in. If you don't have coping mechanisms, taking time off, actually stepping outside for lunch, or setting strict boundaries, acting as holes at the bottom to drain that water out, your bucket is eventually going to overflow straight into burnout. It's a shared responsibility, really. Individuals need to monitor their own buckets, and managers need to actively encourage self-care so their teams don't overflow.
And finally, Section 5, finding internal self-worth. We've managed the external workloads and we've deflected the external insults. Now we have to do the hardest part, replacing our reliance on external applause with an unbreakable internal anchor. In our hyper-performance-driven culture, it is just so easy to rely on likes, promotions, and praise to feel good about ourselves. But to build true, lasting self-worth, we need to follow these therapeutic steps. First, identify your validation sources. Where are you actually seeking that dopamine hit of approval? Second, cultivate mindfulness. Start noticing when you are chasing praise and just pause. Third, align your goals with your own intrinsic values, not what someone else expects of you. And fourth, practice self-compassion. As Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows beautifully, treating yourself with the exact same grace and kindness you'd offer a good friend creates an enduring internal validation. It's validation that doesn't just disappear the second you make a mistake. You literally become your own source of worth.
Which leads us to our final big thought for this explainer. If you were to totally detach your identity from the noise of obnoxious aggression, if you started viewing failure purely as growth, and if you finally stopped measuring your worth by the applause of others, what could you actually achieve? When your validation comes purely from the inside out, you are truly unshakable. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Take these visual tools, put them to work in your own life, and keep learning.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are going to completely flip the script on how you view your past mistakes. Seriously, what if I told you they are actually the ultimate biological and historical blueprint for growth? We're going to strip away all that shame and look at failure for what it truly is, a roadmap.
Let me ask you something. Why does reading your old journals make you cringe so hard? Come on, we've all been there, right? You open a notebook from maybe 5 years ago, you read about 2 sentences, and you immediately snap it shut. We have this visceral, almost physical reaction of discomfort to our own past mistakes, our dramatic rants, and our totally flawed logic. But why exactly does that happen?
Well, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The science of cringe, 2. Fix versus growth mindset, 3. The cycle of experience, 4. Safe spaces to fail, and finally, 5.
World-changing happy accidents.
All right, Section 1, the science of cringe and understanding our psychological defenses.
So, why do our brains trigger such intense discomfort to distance us from our younger, messier selves? The answer actually lies in our narrative identity. This is the polished, idealized story we build about who we are. According to the Rise Within journal, this cringe feeling isn't a sign of weakness at all. It's an ego defense mechanism. It protects our neat little narrative identity from the reality of our nonlinear growth. And this reaction gets amplified by decision fatigue and memory distortion. Our brains naturally smooth out our past anxieties. So when we are suddenly confronted with the raw, unedited proof of our past flaws, it is a total shock to the system.
So how do we actually get past this emotional roadblock? To neutralize our inner critic and extract the wisdom, we have to adopt an anthropologist mindset. Instead of feeling shame, treat your past failures as historical artifacts to study objectively, rather than sins to hide. When you view your old journals as just objective data, you completely detach your ego. It creates this safe buffer so you can actually learn from the person you used to be.
Moving right along to Section 2, Fixed versus Growth Mindset, how we perceive our own abilities.
What's really fascinating is how a simple reaction to a journal entry exposes our underlying psychological framework. Carol Dweck's research beautifully contrasts these two worldviews. First, you have the fixed mindset. This is the belief that intelligence is static and failure suggests permanent limits. If you have this mindset, you run from failure because it literally threatens your core identity. But contrast that with the growth mindset, the belief that intelligence develops and failure is just a learning opportunity. People with a growth mindset embrace mistakes as an essential, exciting process for developing new skills.
Taking this a step further, management theorist Chris Argyris maps this concept right onto organizations. He contrasts the defensive mindset, which is closed, self-protective, and denies harmful truths just to save face, with the productive mindset, which is rooted in logic, transparent, and totally focused on gathering knowledge. Protecting our ego, whether we're reading an old diary alone in our room or sitting in a high-stakes corporate boardroom, inherently prevents development.
Which brings us to Section 3, the cycle of experience, how learning actually happens.
Embracing our mistakes proves that taking action and risking failure is practically a biological requirement for our brains. Kolb's experiential learning cycle maps this out perfectly across 4 continuous steps: concrete learning, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. You see, learning is a continuous loop. You can't just sit around thinking about concepts forever. You absolutely must enter that crucial active experimentation phase. And guess what? That phase inherently invites mistakes and setbacks. Without the risk of failure, the whole loop is completely broken.
Section 4, Safe Spaces to Fail, Fostering Growth in Teams.
If failure is mathematically required for the learning cycle to complete, how do we foster environments where people actually take those risks? Well, Harvard professor Amy Edmondson coined the term team psychological safety. She defines it as the perception that candor is welcome, a belief that one can take the interpersonal risks of speaking up. This is that essential environment where the interpersonal risk of asking a so-called dumb question, admitting an error, or proposing a wild idea is welcomed, not punished.
To actually create this safety, Edmondson advises leaders to follow 3 practical steps. Set the stage by framing failure correctly, invite participation with a humble posture, and always respond productively when someone does speak up. When you successfully couple this psychological safety with a person's intrinsic motivation, you unlock what she calls the high-performance learning zone.
But, and this is a big but, beware of mixed messages. Edmondson warns that mixed messages inherited from the industrial era, like demanding bold innovation but requiring it to be perfectly on time and flawless, will kill risk-taking every single time. If people sense that imperfections are going to be punished, they'll abandon the learning cycle entirely and just default to safe, risk-averse behavior.
All right, final section. Section 5, World-Changing Happy Accidents, Mistakes that Save the World. Let's zoom out to the macro level to see what happens when humanity embraces this active experimentation phase and stops hiding from its errors. Look at this timeline from the X Prize Foundation. It chronicles how some of our absolute greatest medical and scientific breakthroughs were literal accidents. In 1896, Henri Becquerel left uranium in a drawer on a cloudy day and discovered radioactivity. In 1928, Alexander Fleming found mold growing in a petri dish, giving us penicillin.
And in 1956, Wilson Greatbatch grabbed a wrong-size resistor and its rhythmic electrical pulse led to the pacemaker. These brilliant scientists chose to study their mistakes rather than sweep them under the rug.
And honestly, the list goes on and on. From discovering the Deinonychus dinosaur by accident in the 1930s, to Dr. Harry Coover uncovering superglue while trying to make gun sights in 1942. We see it in the synthesis of LSD-25 in 1943, in the discovery of cosmic background radiation in 1965. Even as recently as 2016, scientists inadvertently tweaked an enzyme to eat PET plastics 6 times faster. The evidence is crystal clear here. Failing forward is the true engine of human progress.
So, the absolutely crucial takeaway from all of this is that failure is merely unextracted data waiting for an objective observer. Whether you're reading a highly embarrassing journal entry or pulling the wrong resistor for a heart monitor, failure is just raw data. You just need to put on your anthropologist hat to extract the wisdom.
I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If the greatest scientific discoveries and the most profound personal growth come from studying our mistakes, what world-changing data is hiding in your past failures? It is time to stop cringing, my friends. Embrace that active experimentation phase, build your psychological safety, and go mine your data. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.